From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $80 million studio. I'm the Pro Wrestle Machine. One of the most memorable matches in WWF history is the Hell in a Cell match between Mankind and Undertaker. Let's look at the coverage of it when it happened. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. July 6, 1998 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. WWF King of the Ring with Mankind, Undertaker in Hell in a Cell, tons more. By Observer staff. Mick Foley has long since established himself as one of the greats in the pro wrestling industry. And over the last year probably solidified whatever doubts there would be as to him being remembered when his career is over as Hall of Fame caliber wrestling legend. But whatever he has done, and whatever he will ever do within the pro wrestling business, he will always be remembered for June 28, 1998 in the match that will never be forgotten against The Undertaker in the Hell in the Cell in Pittsburgh. Under the guise of his Mankind character, Foley became this generation's version of Jimmy Snuka, only to a much larger audience thanks to the magic of international coverage and live pay-per-view. In 1982 and again in 1984 in Madison Square Garden, in steel cage matches against Bob Backlund and Don Muraco, Snuka, in bare feet, climbed to the top of the cage for his patented Superfly leap. He actually missed the one against Backlund, which led to Backlund crawling out of the cage and retaining his WWF title. But to everyone in the building that night and those watching the broadcast on the MSG network, it was a moment they would never forget. If it wasn't for all of Snuka's personal problems, that moment could have wound up with him, and not Hulk Hogan, being the attempted standard bearer when the WWF went national. 2 years later, in front of a wider audience, Snuka again lost in the cage when challenging Muraco for the IC title. But after the match, Snuka climbed to the top of the cage again, stood up, and leapt off, this time hitting his target. It was another moment etched solidly in the memories of everyone in the sold-out Garden that night, including a teenage ringside fan named Mick Foley, that they will never forget. Wrestling has evolved greatly from the days of Jimmy Snuka. While even by today's standards what Snuka did was breathtaking and more than a little bit psychotic, but there have been plenty of copycats who have upped the ante quite a bit. We've seen guys leap off higher heights, take more punishing falls, and go through stacks of tables. And despite those risks, in many cases, after seeing the bumps, not only are they not etched in everyone's minds for decades and even generations, but most are truthfully forgotten within a few hours. How many people without prompting really remember the Pitbull number 2 taking the bump off the top of the truck, or any of New Jack's dives in specific as opposed to a vague remembrance of the open of the ECW TV show, where the Night Mascara de Sagrada at 4 feet tall came off the top of a cage that was a good 4 feet higher than the one Snuka came off? Hayabusa did a moonsault off the top of a cage the same height as Snuka splashed off last December, and really, how many people talk about that? With Undertaker working with bone chips in his ankle that limited his mobility and theoretically would hamper the match, everyone figured Foley would be there to make it and save it. And that turned out to be correct, although few knew going into what lengths he would go. With both men brawling on top of the giant cage, Undertaker literally threw Mankind off the cage, from a height of several feet higher than the somewhat similar and oft-repeated bump Shawn Michaels took from the same cage last October, through the Spanish-language announcer's table. It was said to be a 16-foot fall, and while numbers like that in wrestling are usually ridiculously exaggerated, it looked every bit of it. Mankind laid there motionless for several minutes as they tried to give the impression he was crippled and his career was in jeopardy, a moment of attempting to pull the fakery into reality that's cover was blown largely due to the overacting of several of the bystanders. So as he was carried away on a stretcher, he got up off the stretcher, climbed to the top of the cage and began brawling again. This time a gimmick part of the cage collapsed and he took another similar bump inside the ring. After another few minutes of selling, the match continued again. After some brawling he pulled out a bag of thumbtacks from under the ring, dumped it all over the mat, took 2 bumps onto the thumbtacks and was hit with a tombstone piledriver and pinned. The thumbtacks, after all that had happened, were thought apparently to be necessary because after what Mankind had already gotten up from, what excuse could logically be given to keep him down? But they were also overkill that not only didn't add to the drama, but ended the drama 1 minute prematurely with a feeling of not watching a courageous performance on a major league stage but watching a sick minor league barroom geek show. Although a stretcher was brought out again, Foley left the ring under his own power to a mystifying crowd reaction, as Jim Ross was proclaiming that if ever anyone deserved a standing ovation this was the time, an inarguable point, but aside from some relatively light Foley chants, the ovation would be described as somewhat polite but nothing more. The reports after the match we received on his medical condition is that he dislocated his jaw and had 3 teeth dislodged on the first bump. Luckily the teeth were all cleanly dislodged, so that they were all able to be reinserted later that evening. The jaw was put back into place by Francois Petty, who was billed as the medical doctor on call on the broadcast, but is actually the shiatsu masseuse for Vince McMahon and Steve Austin. One of the teeth somehow wound up in his nose. He needed stitches in his mouth from a cut apparently when another errant tooth cut through his lip on the first bump, and was taken from the building after the show to the hospital, but not before coming back after his match for a run-in during the title match. Both bumps did at least momentarily knock him silly. There is also the possibility of internal injuries, and he supposedly has little if any memory of the match. So the question becomes, where does the business go from here? For Foley, sure, there's a one-way ticket right into every mythical pro wrestling hall of fame, and in one night he turned himself into a bona fide all-time pro wrestling legend, a status he was pretty well close to anyway. Several 100,000 people saw the match live around the world, and through the magic of videotape and endless replays, those bumps will be viewed by tens of millions before the end of the week and exponentially more before the end of time. Foley got up, and while to say he emerged unscathed would be far from the truth, but he didn't break any bones and didn't even wind up with a long hospital stay from blows that literally could have ended his life if he'd been a few inches off on landing the first time. The scary part is not what we just saw, but what we will witness next. As is the case with the business, a whole bunch of guys will try to emulate what is permanently etched in their mind, just as Foley won up the memory of Snuka from his own childhood. We'll see more balcony dives that nobody will remember. We'll see minis take bumps off skyscrapers which will fade from everyone's memories within hours. And one day, someone will suffer a terrible fate. Of course, pro wrestling is dangerous and the injury rate seems to grow by the week even without people trying to up the ante. But realistically, this business has been very lucky. While wrestlers talk about literally risking their lives, and they definitely are risking their bodies, whenever they do suicidal stunts, when we talk about deaths of active young wrestlers, they are from overdoses or auto wrecks. With all the wrestling held nightly in Mexico and all the young inexperienced guys doing crazy moves, I can only recall 1 or 2 deaths in the ring over the past 20 years. There has only been one in-ring death in the history of Japanese wrestling, and that appears not to have been from a dangerous move as much as a pre-existing condition. The few deaths in the ring in the US were legends from the 60s and 70s, generally older guys who hung on past their prime and whose hearts gave out. But my last impression of the Undertaker-Mankind match was that as long as I live, I can state with certainty that I will never forget the performance, and there isn't a lot about wrestling that I'd make that statement about. Mick Foley will be linked with a Hell in the Cell more than Shawn Michaels will ever be linked with a ladder match, just as Bret Hart will never escape the link of the most disastrous night of his career, no matter what he did beforehand and what he'll end up doing for the rest of his career. And whether it wins Match of the Year or it doesn't, and in some ways it probably shouldn't, and in other ways how can you even argue against it because of the impression it created? When it was over, it was the greatest match ever that left me sad when it was over. I really wish I had never seen it. Not because it wasn't entertaining or that it wasn't a great match. It was both. Until the thumbtacks, it was dramatic as all hell. It's funny, because I'm happy for Foley, because he probably on this night finally accomplished what he set out to do with his life as a child, and that is give millions of people a memory that they'll always remember, and very few people in the world are fortunate enough to be able to live out their true dream. In that way, it's a wonderful thing. Whether the euphoria is worth the pain he'll suffer from this and all the other beatings in later life is something only he can decide, and he's a grown-up who is intelligent enough to make his own value judgments. Maybe when he's 70 he'll be living with so much pain that he'll think he was an idiot. And maybe he'll think back and the feeling inside will be that it was all worth it. Terry Funk is still doing moonsaults off balconies long after logic would have told him to stop, and in his own soul there must be a reason, because his friends and family no doubt wish he'd stop. I've talked with enough older wrestlers who didn't try anything of the sort and felt what they did wasn't worth it, and others who no doubt would gladly go through it all again without being asked twice. But I'm sad and afraid. Not for Foley's future. Not for the business, which will survive the next set of tragedies a lot easier than the last set because fans are so desensitized. But I'm sad and afraid for someone, and nobody even knows who, that was watching this match on television this weekend and in 5 or even 15 years will try to live out the dream etched in their memory and won't wind up being as lucky a man as Mick Foley. The Monday night ratings on June 29th were a total annihilation for the World Wrestling Federation in every sense of the word. The gap between the quality of the Raw and Nitro shows may have never been greater, and the ratings exemplified that from top to bottom. What was also impressive is that after 2 months of generally declining numbers overall, the overall audience was at a near record pace, largely due to Raw, and being that it was in the summer with fewer people watching television, the actual audience share also broke records. Raw drew its third highest rating in history for the show that was highlighted by Steve Austin beating Kane to regain the WWF title, and the highest mark in history for an opposed show, doing a 5.36 rating, 5.17 first hour, 5.56 seconds hour, and an 8.83 share. As far as for an opposed show, these marks all broke the record set by the April 20th Nitro with a 5.11 rating and 8.35 share, although the all-time rating remains a 5.69 for the Raw episode on April 27th going unopposed. Nitro actually wound up doing a similar rating as it has the past several weeks with a 4.05 rating, 4.42 first hour, 3.95 seconds hour, 3.78 third hour, and a 6.84 share. In addition, the Nitro replay did a 1.3 rating and a phenomenal 7.5 share. It shows that as bad as Nitro was, and it was really bad, that Raw drew a lot of regular Nitro viewers. Nitro dropped from a 4.9 to a 3.6 when Raw started, which is a much larger drop than usual, since Nitro drew a very strong first hour, many of which stayed up until 4 a.m. to catch what they missed on Nitro by watching the replay. The combined head-to-head 2 hours drew a 9.23 rating or 6,769,000 total homes, falling just short of the record 9.48 rating and 6,920,000 homes set on April 20th. Raw's peak head-to-head quarter, which was the final quarter with a title change, drew a 5.94 rating and 10.2 share in 4,365,000 homes. The all-time Raw record was set on April 13th for the Vince McMahon-Steve Austin non-match in Philadelphia with a 6.0 rating in 4,414,000 homes, and the all-time opposed rated quarter hour was set on April 20th for the Hulk Hogan vs. Randy Savage WCW title change, which drew a 6.53 rating and 10.7 share in 4,774,000 homes. Raw actually peaked with an amazing 6.90 rating in 5,070,000 homes for the 3-minute overrun after Nitro had gone off the air, which most likely for that 3 minutes would be the largest audience ever watching any show at one point on a Monday night. WCW's climax of the show with the Hulk Hogan angle with Karl Malone and Diamond Dallas Page drew a 3.99 rating, so the combined 9.93 final quarter was one of the highest in history as well, but the combined 17.0 share in that 15 minutes was nothing short of mind-blowing, and the average 15.1 share over the 2 hours was also an all-time record. The ratings were never close in any quarter, with Raw getting off with the McMahon, Austin, Kane, Paul Bearer confrontation leading to the main event being agreed to do a 5.4 rating, while WCW had the end of a Hogan and Bischoff interview and the beginning of Sting and Luger vs. Neidhart and Bulldog doing a 3.6. Each side tried a major experiment, neither of which got over with a live crowd. WCW had Bischoff attempt to do a segment called NWO Late Night, with a Tonight Show type set with a band, led by Reverend Billy Wirtz, a former pro wrestling manager in Florida many years back and nightclub comic, with a lengthy interview with Scott Steiner which bombed royally live and ranked as among the worst segments ever on a Nitro, which bombed doing a 3.4 rating. WWF attempted to do matches without a predetermined finish, which is something I never thought I'd see in the WWF and wonder what that means if they run in states where pro wrestling isn't regulated but where boxing or tough man contests are as far as tax laws and the like are concerned. They are trying to do a tough man type of tournament, with shoot matches, fighting with 3 1-minute rounds to minimize the guys gassing out, with 20-ounce gloves to minimize the damages of the punches, and with takedowns legal but with the wrestlers immediately stood up to eliminate any ground fighting or submissions. They had corner men who could throw in the towel, and used wrestling legend Danny Hodge as the referee. Interesting to note that Jim Ross made a much bigger deal of Hodge's standing as an amateur wrestler and Golden Gloves boxing champion as compared with his lengthy history as a major star in pro wrestling, to where from a historical standpoint, he'd probably have to rank along with Jushin Liger as the greatest junior heavyweight wrestler in history. The rules were that every takedown would be worth 5 points, a knockdown would be worth 10 points, a knockout would end the match, no actual wrestling holds were legal. Can you imagine the silliness that when pro wrestlers in the US shoot they aren't allowed to use any wrestling holds, and whoever delivered the most punches in a round would get 5 points. No tournament bracketing was announced, but 2 matches took place. Neither got over live, and in fact the normally receptive modern WWF crowd that accepts almost anything was chanting "We want wrestling" during the Mark Merrow vs. Steve Blackman shoot, and delivering loud boring chants during the Mark Canterbury, formerly Henry Godwin, vs. Bradshaw shoot. For the record, in the first 2 matches in WWF history where the outcomes weren't pre-planned, Blackman continually took Merrow down, and Merrow wasn't able to show any of his vaunted boxing skills, and in fact, what of the fight was standing Blackman more than held his own as well, en route to a one-sided decision that basically exposed that Mero couldn't wrestle and that in a real situation against a wrestler, his boxing skills wouldn't do him any good. Bradshaw was awarded the decision over Canterbury, although if you kept score, it should have been a draw as Bradshaw won 2 of the 3 rounds, giving him a 10-5 edge, but Canterbury did take him down once. There was a period in the second round where Bradshaw rocked Canterbury, although he never knocked him down. It was more like watching a low-level tough man contest as 2 big guys banged away with no form or skill, and even with the short 1-minute rounds, both were noticeably gassing 40 seconds into it. We don't know much in the way of details of where this is going, although we did learn about it several days ahead of time when the WWF was basically asking a lot of its wrestlers that were going nowhere. They won't let any of the top guys get exposed by showing they may lack skill fighting on the roster to enter this cross between a bad tough man contest and an unskilled version of Draka or shootboxing with the hopes that a good showing might make an impression on the fans and help get them over, and that they would be paid extra for doing the shoots. Neither Dan Severn or Ken Shamrock were allowed to enter. Under the rules they have, Severn in particular would destroy everyone in there because he'd be able to take them all down at will time after time and pile up an insurmountable lead in points, and with those almost pillow-like gloves, nobody is going to knock him out. Shamrock probably would as well and is probably more proficient with gloves than most of the guys they'd have there as well if he felt like standing, but since there are no submissions, the rules work away from his strength in real fighting. There was also the theory they are doing real matches to set up an eventual Severn-Shamrock showdown and try and push that it's real, because it could do box office if both promoted correctly and if people believe it's real, but it's doubtful after King of the Ring that Severn can do any box office within the guise of what people believe is worked pro wrestling. Of course, no matter how it's hyped going in, Severn-Shamrock in the WWF is going to have a worked ending because they can't take the risk of having a match like their second UFC bout. We did get one office report that while this would start out as shoots, that eventually angles would be done with it, which lends credence to that theory. There is an argument that airing shoots exposes the rest of the show as works, but in this day and age when people have seen shoots and works and everyone knows wrestling is a work, that argument really doesn't hold water. It does, however, risk exposing guys as not being good fighters in real life, which is very different from participating in matches that are worked, and the fact that big guys are pounding away without even staggering the other makes it weird when they bump for single punches in the future. But again, everyone knows pro wrestling itself is a work. But when none of the top guys are put at risk, there is really no harmful effect on box office to this, unlike Rings, which really hurt itself at the gate when its superstar Kiyoshi Tamura was routed by Valentine Overeem. While people are talking about this as an idea being revolutionary in pro wrestling, and it is in the United States, this was done with regularity for years in the All Japan women's promotion, where all the women in their early years had to prove themselves in kickboxing rule shoots as being able to handle legit combat to legitimize them before being pushed as wrestling stars, although that went out of vogue in the early 90s. In those days, the shoot matches were really dull as compared with the worked matches, but they also booked them with 5 3-minute rounds because that promotion's training emphasized stamina, whereas in WWF it's readily accepted that very few of these guys would be able to last if the rounds were long. Mero vs. Blackman started out with a 5.5, an exceptional number, and fell to a 5.4 for the third round, so those numbers had to be considered great, particularly for those two. Bradshaw vs. Canterbury did a 5.2, which was a big drop from the 5.6 that the Helmsley-Shamrock Hart three-way dance ended up at, so while it was a good number for any quarter, it was the second lowest of the show. Regal vs. Drostoff with the Sable interview clocked in at 4.7. I'd have to call that as nothing to make a point with, other than it probably was a hell of a lot better number than the two of them would have done had they worked a pro wrestling match in the same time slot. In that sense, after 1 week, from a rating standpoint, the experiment would be somewhat successful, although definitely not to the live audience. In the shadow of the Undertaker-Mankind match, and with both Undertaker and Mankind in the ring causing the finish, Kane, Glenn Jacobs, captured the WWF title from Steve Austin in a first blood match as the main event of the King of the Ring show from the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, but it was a one-day affair, with Austin regaining the title on the Raw television taping the next night in Cleveland. King of the Ring had to be considered a thumbs up due to the last 3 matches. Austin, weakened from a several-day bout with a staph infection, still put on a good match with a well-booked finish to headline the show. Ken Shamrock, who was the logical choice to win King of the Ring, was given his biggest WWF win to date and had a very good final match with Rocky Maivia. But up until that point, the show was typical WWF. A weak undercard plagued by disappointing work and an even more disappointing lack of crowd reactions, described by those live as until the last 3 matches being like a tomb. The Civic Arena sold out more than 1 week in advance with 17,087 in the building, of which 15,505 were paid, setting the all-time Citygate record of $539,660, and also did another $148,569 in merchandise. 1. Headbangers Charles Warrington and Glenn Ruth, and Takamichinoku Takao Yoshida beat Dick Togo, Shigeki Sato, and Men's Teo Takeo Otsuka, and Shoichi Funaki in an unannounced match in 641. This was a solid fast-paced opener with some good moves, but it didn't have time to build. Michinoku did his running springboard plancha on Funaki. Togo did a move where he started it as a baseball slide but turned it into a spinning head scissors on the floor. Togo and Funaki did a great combination bulldog headlock and power bomb. Finish saw Michinoku pin Funaki after the Michinoku driver 2 1/4 stars. Before the next match, Sable walked to the ring without tipping over, and introduced Vince McMahon, who came out with Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe. As Sable left, Patterson patted her on her ass and Sable turned around and slapped Patterson in the face. When Patterson patted her ass, Jim Ross made some remark about Patterson being in place he'd never been before. McMahon did an interview. It was hilarious in one spot, and that as he talked about how Kane was going to win the title, at ringside, wearing an Austin 316 shirt, and never identified, was heavyweight boxer Michael Moorer cheering McMahon, apparently not realizing what was going on. Anyway, McMahon did easily the worst interview since he's been playing this role, as he came off like a green independent manager insulting fans and went on far too long trying to get the cheap heat. When the show was over, it was clear, due to the injuries to Undertaker and Austin, that they were adding matches and segments to kill time, as the show ended about 10 minutes early even with adding the 2 new matches. They showed 2 more replays of Sable slapping Patterson. 2. In the first King of the Ring semifinal, Ken Shamrock beat Jeff Jarrett in 5:29. The crowd wasn't into this match at all. The 2 didn't miss any moves, so there was nothing wrong with the match, but they didn't have time to build and they had no heat going in. Shamrock nearly killed himself when he did a running Hurricane Rana and in turning over appeared to hit his head on the mat, and then clamped on the ankle lock for the submission. 1 star. 3. In the other semifinal, Rocky Maivia, Dwayne Johnson pinned Dan Severn in 4:25. Awful. Also no heat. Severn took Maivia down and got a few submissions early, but Maivia would always make the ropes. When Maivia started the brawling and Severn started the selling, not only did the crowd start cheering Maivia, but Severn's inexperience at selling was killing the match. Maivia's knee was giving him a lot of trouble and made his stomps look weak. Kama Mustafa and Mark Henry came out to distract the ref, which brought D'Lo Brown out from the other side wearing what appeared to be something similar to a baseball umpire's chest protector, and he did a frog splash on Severn, allowing Maivia to score the pin. This may have been the first pinfall loss Severn has ever taken as a pro wrestler. I can recall 2 or 3 submission losses in Japan for UWFI before he became a star in UFC, but never a pinfall loss. While there was no other way out of this finished as kill Severn as an international pro wrestling attraction because all he had to offer was that nobody had ever beaten him. -1/2 star. 4. Brian Christopher, Brian Lawler, and Scott Taylor beat Al Snow, Alan Sarvin, and Head in 8:27. The stipulations were that if Snow and Head lost, then Snow would have to leave the WWF. Naturally, after Sable lost, the loser leaves and came back without even so much as an attempt at an illogical explanation, and after Vader lost his mask, only to still be wearing it the next day. Any WWF stipulations don't mean a thing, and I doubt one fan actually cares that Snow isn't leaving. It was Christopher and Taylor's first big national exposure for their Too Much tag team, and hopefully their future will be brighter than their debut. They are similar sized and actually almost look like brothers, with Taylor kind of patterning himself as a cross between Christopher and Eddie Gilbert. Jerry Lawler was announced as the surprise ref, and when he took his jacket off to put on his referee shirt, he's aged so much physically that he's looking like a smaller version of the 80s George Steele. Lawler played total heel ref, counting ridiculously slow when Snow had a guy pinned, and ridiculously fast when Snow was down, along with stopping Snow's offense to give Too Much the edge. At one point, Snow backdropped Taylor onto Christopher outside the ring and did a wind sprint clothesline on Christopher, which the fans didn't understand, and then got hit with a dive by Taylor. Lawler helped Taylor into the corner to tag Christopher. Snow hit both men with a double DDT and tagged the Head. There was no pop for the hot tag, which showed the crowd didn't buy the spoof at all. Snow hit everyone with the Head and hit the Northern Lights bomb on Christopher. Lawler refused to count the fall. Snow gave Taylor a low blow with the Head and threw down the Head and covered Taylor. Lawler wouldn't count. Christopher then got a bottle of Head and Shoulders shampoo, no doubt because the Head had dandruff, and put the head on the bottle and then covered both with Lawler counting 3 since the shampoo bottle represented the head's shoulders. Sometimes the comedy works and sometimes it doesn't, and this time it didn't even come close. Even Jim Ross basically admitted it was a travesty on television, which may also be a first. -2 stars. 5. X-Pac, Sean Waltman, pinned Owen Hart in 8:30. The match had no heat but the wrestling was good. X-Pac worked as the face but the crowd didn't take to him at all as the face nor to Hart as the heel, so they were just indifferent to both even though both worked hard. The only pop, and it was small, was X-Pac doing the Bronco ride spot. After a collision with X-Pac falling out of the ring, it was time for the lame finish which deflated what little intensity the match had. Given they were clearly already stretching the show out, these two should have been given 15 minutes to do their thing. Mark Henry came out and splashed X-Pac. Then Chyna began arguing with Henry. While this was going on, Hart put X-Pac in the sharpshooter but the ref was busy outside the ring while X-Pac was tapping out. Vader then came out and did a body block on Henry which Vader himself took a tumble on. While this was going on, Chyna got in the ring and gave Hart a DDT and the ref turned around and counted as X-Pac got the pin. 2 1/4 stars. 6. In an unannounced match added at the last minute, New Age Outlaws, Brian James and Monty Sop, beat Midnight Express, Mike Polchlepeek and Robert Howard, to retain the WWF Tag Titles in 9:54. Midnights were still acknowledged as NWA Tag Team Champions even though the NWA gimmick is gone. Severn is no longer referred to as NWA Heavyweight Champion, and they are basically the lowest level jobber team on the roster. They did acknowledge Billy and Bart's former incarnation as Wrestling Brothers. Match was fairly solid athletically but the fans didn't care. Only pop was when Billy told Bart to suck it. Later Holly knocked down Billy and told him not only to suck it, but also said F you, but nobody reacted to that. Outlaws worked as the faces in that Jam took punishment and hot tagged Billy, who even in his new incarnation as a star still hasn't learned to throw a decent looking punch. Jim Cornette hit Billy with one of the NWA tag belts, but of course Billy kicked out as everyone knows a secondary tag title belt can't knock anyone out. Cornette ran in to do the same spot a second time, but Billy got up in Chyna as Cornette stalled. Came from behind and gave Cornette a low blow. Both Outlaws then gave Bob Holly a double hot shot and Billy pinned him. 1 1/2 star. 7. Shamrock beat Maivia in 1409 to win the King of the Ring tournament. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, last year's winner, was at ringside doing color and trying to keep an angle with Maivia going. Helmsley was okay on color, not nearly as funny as he usually is doing promos. There was one spot where Helmsley spit in Maivia's face, and Maivia pie-faced him down. When Helmsley got up, he said into the headset, "Testes, 1 2 3" instead of testing. Shamrock sold his leg as the match started picking up. They traded near falls back and forth, with the ref counting the falls doing a hell of a job in building the drama. There were a couple of near misses that were great. Maivia reversed a Hurricane Rana into a hot shot. However, seemingly out of nowhere, Shamrock trapped Maivia's leg and used the ankle lock for the tap-out submission. 3 1/4 stars. 8. Undertaker and Mark Calloway pinned Mankind, Mick Foley, in about 16 minutes in the Hell in the Cell match. The match started with both on the top of the cage. Undertaker stepped in a spot on the cage that wasn't well put together as it gave way and he really could have been hurt. There were a few hard chair shots to the back before Mankind took the first bump. After 5 minutes, they restarted the match and almost immediately he took the second bump into the ring. Terry Funk, who came out after the first bump, tried to stop Undertaker from continuing to destroy Mankind, but got choke-slammed and knocked out of the way. Mankind was bleeding from the mouth at this point, although it's possible that was gimmicked, but it's certainly believable that it wasn't. Undertaker hit him a few times with the steps that Mankind tried to use, but in selling the shoulder, which took the brunt of the first bump, couldn't lift the steps up. After some brutal punches reminiscent of the ones Foley voluntarily took a few years back from Vader to get over a WCW angle, Undertaker went for a tope and crashed into the cage. Undertaker juiced. Mankind pile drove him on a chair for a near fall and did a leg drop onto a chair onto his face and a double arm DDT. He then poured the thumbtacks all over the ring. Mankind used the claw but Undertaker powered out and eventually gave him a fallaway onto the thumbtacks, a choke slam on the thumbtacks, and the tombstone piledriver. 4 1/2 stars. 9. Kane Glenn Jacobs captured the WWF title from Steve Austin, Stephen Williams, in 1452 of a first blood match. Austin did a great job under the circumstances since he couldn't have been nearly 100% after spending 3 days in the hospital. He physically looked weakened and seemed to tire quicker than usual, but still carried the match. Austin started by attacking Kane with the title belt and undoing a turnbuckle pad and running him into it. At this point I think we found out which company was copying which company when it came to the dueling cages on Monday a few weeks ago. Eric Bischoff, Vince McMahon, was in the owner's box with Sable. Between Nitro and Raw these days I have this feeling I'm watching a bunch of people going through a very public midlife crisis. If that didn't clinch who was doing the copying, the levitating cage, just 2 weeks after the same angle on Nitro, ended the speculation. All's fair in love in a wrestling war, but please spare me any attempts at portraying either side in this war as the good guys or the bad guys. With Austin in trouble, the cage started coming down, with the illusion given that McMahon was behind it. As Austin would take control, the cage would be raised again. Austin took a cage shot in the head. Actually, Austin was bleeding from the back early, but it was ignored, but they also did give an explanation before the match, with Earl Hebner saying basically it would take copious amounts of blood to end the match, so an accidental unscripted cut, as took place on Austin's back, could be ignored. At another point with Austin on the ground, they teased the cage coming down and basically beheading Austin. They brawled in the ramp area with Austin going for a pile driver but Kane reversing it, and Kane suplexed Austin on the ramp. Austin rammed Kane again into the unprotected turnbuckle and hit him in the face with a fan. Outside the ring, Hebner got squashed in the guardrail and was bumped. Kane hit a clothesline off the top, but missed a second one. Mankind came out. At this point the cage started lowering. Austin hit a stunner on both Mankind and then Kane, and at this point Undertaker showed up. Undertaker and Mankind played dueling chairs, but Mankind ducked a chair shot, causing Undertaker to hit Austin, who sliced his head open badly and was bleeding heavily. Undertaker poured what was purported to be gasoline, there for Kane to set himself on fire if he lost, all over Hebner to revive him. Austin was bleeding a river and Hebner saw it and ended the match, but not before Austin laid Kane out with a chair shot. The closing shot of the show was McMahon and Sable in the luxury box, and under the visage of McMahon it read, Kane, new WWF champion, as to signify McMahon had planned it all from the start and put the heat on the switch to McMahon and away from either Kane, Paul Bearer or Undertaker. 3¼ stars. K1's attempt to gain a foothold in the United States after already achieving extraordinary success in both Japan and Switzerland, and its attempt to replace the beleaguered UFC as the new sport fighting rage will begin over the next several weeks with an ESPN special and a live pay-per-view show. What is on the table is a prime-time special at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on July 23rd on ESPN, which will air, in heavily edited form, the 1997 K1 Grand Prix tournament held last November at the Tokyo Dome, which was won by Ernesto Hoost. The show will have English voiceovers done by Bruce Beck and Don Wilson, the same pair so familiar to UFC fans for most of that group's history. If all goes well, that could lead to regular television on ESPN in September. That show will build to the first K1 show in the United States, a live pay-per-view called K1, the new fighting sport, held on August 7th from the Mirage Hotel in Las Vegas, with Peter Aerts vs. Maurice Smith as the main event, with Beck and Wilson being joined by boxing legend Marvin Hagler on the broadcast team and with Michael Buffer as ring announcer to give it the major league feel. K1 is known as much in Japan for its television production values and special effects, which are for the most part more advanced than either WCW or WWF, as much as for its ability to market superstars and its spectacular knockouts. Art Davie, the longtime matchmaker who was one of the founders of UFC, before leaving the group at the end of last year, is heading the American version of K1 along with Kazuyoshi Ishii, who created the company in 1993 and made it all the rage in Japan to where its big events draw ratings similar to the NBA playoff finals in the United States. And more impressive was the June 6th show in Zurich, Switzerland, which aired on television live in that country built around native Andy Hug, probably the top marquee star in K1, who actually became a celebrity in his home country largely because word got to Switzerland about what a celebrity he already was in Japan. The June 6th match where he defeated Aerts drew an incredible 53.8 rating on Swiss TV, the equivalent of a Super Bowl type of audience interest level in the United States. But the United States is entirely different. Davey's belief is that K1 will be an easier sell than UFC, because the knockouts are more prevalent. Since the fights are all standing, there are no submissions and groundwork that the casual fan doesn't understand. However, my belief is that UFC captures a certain chord among American sports fans, and its failure, if that's even the correct term, is far more political than a weakness in the product's excitement level. K1 does look more like a real fight in people's imagination since it's all punching, kicking and knees, than a real fight like UFC appears with the ground technique, but because leg kicking isn't really understood by Americans because it's foreign to their perception of what a real fight looks like caused by generations with nothing but boxing in the combat spotlight. It also will take education. Most importantly, it lacks at this point the political opposition that UFC has encountered, and already has a major corporate sponsorship in Sony, something UFC, because of its controversy, was never able to obtain. Every major cable system is expected to clear the show along with Viewers' Choice in Canada, which did huge numbers, as much as 1.5 buy rates, for UFCs before governmental pressure in Canada caused the pay-per-view companies in Canada to drop UFC in the wake of the extreme fighting fiasco in Quebec on the Indian reservation. The card will contain 2 super fights and an 8-man tournament, with the winner of the tourney gaining an automatic entry into the K1 Grand Prix, which will be held this year starting at the Osaka Dome and ending in December at the Tokyo Dome. While not finalized, the current battle plan for K1 in the United States is for a second pay-per-view show in December, which would be the Grand Prix finals from the Tokyo Dome, probably on a tape delay, and to do 3 live pay-per-view events in 1999 in the United States, along with another pay-per-view from Japan being the Grand Prix finals. In another interesting twist, it is believed that Las Vegas will post gambling odds on the matches, which is interesting due to the occasional suspicious results. Let's clear one thing up. K1 is not a work like pro wrestling. It is probably closer to pro boxing in that regard, except it has a stable of stars that are marketed more like a hot national wrestling promotion, many of whom have several commercial endorsements in Japan, who seem to trade wins with each other. Hug, the top star, has a most interesting record. When Patrick Smith was gaining fame in the early days of UFC, Smith, who has fought as a kickboxer but was never considered anywhere near world-class, went to Japan and knocked Hug out in the first round, although Hug later avenged that defeat. In 1996, Hug became the biggest star in K1 by capturing the Grand Prix tournament. But after winning the tournament, he immediately lost a suspicious first-round knockout to Ertz, and then in 1997 at the Nagoya Dome, lost a one-punch knockout to Francisco Filho, a former karate champion from Brazil who had never competed before in a gloved fight, so it would be the equivalent of a boxer coming right out of the Olympics and in his first pro fight not only being competitive, but knocking out Evander Holyfield with one punch, but it did create an instant attraction. It seems that every year K1 tries to create a new superstar to add to the mix of Ertz, Hug, and Hoost. In 1996, it was big South African Mike Bernardo, who destroyed Ertz twice and became an immediate sensation to the point that he has numerous television commercials in Japan. Bernardo then lost to Hug in Switzerland and to Hoost and Ertz in Japan, but not before getting over as the group's power puncher by his early devastating knockouts in his first big matches. In 1997, the new star was Filho with 2 quick one-punch wins against Hug and fellow television star Sam Greco before going into the Grand Prix tournament and losing via decision to Hoost in the semifinals. Hoost, known in Japan as Mr. Perfect, a name likely stolen from Kurt Hennig because he is the best technical fighter in the promotion, beat Hug to win the Grand Prix at the Tokyo Dome, but since then Hoost lost the first big Japanese show of 1998 to Ertz. Ertz then went to Switzerland and lost to hometown hero Hug. Ertz vs. Smith headlines the first pay-per-view. Smith gained more fame in the United States through winning both the EFC and UFC titles over the past 2 years than he did in nearly 20 years as a world-class kickboxer. At 37, Smith's kickboxing career has probably seen its best days, but he's still competitive with most of the bigger names and is planning on competing in K1 through the end of 1999, at which point he plans to go back into MMA. Ertz, however, handed Smith one of his few knockout defeats in 1993 in Japan in K1's infancy, a first-round KO with a kick upside the head. The other super fight pits Hug against Mike Labrie, an American who fights often in Atlantic City. The 8-man tournament features Rick Rufus, Pedro Fernandez, Jerome Turkin, Expedito da Silva, Jean-Claude Luyer, Tomax Kusharzewski, Jean Riviere, and Curtis Schuster, with them squaring off in 3-round matches until an ultimate winner is determined. Rufus is the biggest name in the tournament, but wouldn't necessarily be the favorite due to the rules. Kickboxing is largely broken down into 2 divisions: full contact, which doesn't allow leg kicks, and Muay Thai, which does. K1 is actually Seto Kaikan, which is pretty much the same rules as Muay Thai, in which basically any form of striking while standing, where it be spinning back fists, knees or elbows, are all legal. Any rule change favors the style of fighter who specializes in those rules, and Rufus is a full contact fighter and thus isn't experienced against leg kickers, although he did put up a good accounting for himself last year in the Grand Prix before losing to one of K1's better fighters named Jerome Lebanner. Luyer and Schuster are generally considered the 2 best Americans when it comes to Muay Thai style, although Schuster is not the kind of fighter that will get over with the public. Lawyer, from San Jose, California, recently fought Maurice Smith to a 12-round draw in Draca, would probably be the tournament favorite, and to show that phony records are still in vogue, is listed as having a 35-0-1 record even though he's been knocked out spectacularly both by Ertz and Greco in Japan. All the $250 and $175 tickets, the best seats, have been sold for the debut show, although that's misleading because so many of them were sold to area casinos, and one would expect a slew of Japanese tourists to come in, which is one of the lures of K1 to casinos in Las Vegas, since rich Japanese are notorious for spending a lot of money in Vegas. The building is set up for 5,035 live and is apparently more than half sold out. Atsushi Onita's debut in ECW to start building to an apparent explosive match against Sandman took place on June 27 at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, but when the night was over, Onita was not the Japanese wrestler everyone was talking about. Onita debuted as the mystery partner of Sandman and Dreamer against the Dudleys, but as it turned out, wound up turning on them and causing them to lose. After the show, Paul Heyman held a press conference, which will air on ECW TV, but was done more for the purpose of getting ECW, its top talent, and the match over in Japan with the Japanese media coverage. Onita did his gimmick screaming, which apparently came across as too cartoonish outside his element, where he proclaimed himself the king of the death matches and challenged Sandman. Sandman then busted a beer can on his head so he bled, and then with Sandman's blood dripping on Onita, they shook hands and posed for photos. No date or place has been finalized for the match that is expected to take place this summer, and not on a pay-per-view show. However, it was Masato Tanaka who was the star of the show. In what was reported as the best match on the card, which also got over the biggest on the card, Tanaka pinned Balls Mahoney in a chair-swinging brawl. In the main event on the show, Sabu and Rob Van Dam captured the ECW tag titles that they were scheduled to win 3 weeks earlier, beating Chris Condito and Lance Storm when Sabu and Van Dam both put Storm through a table. With the next UFC event not until October in Sao Paulo, Brazil, UFC is listing October 9th date on its website, although we're told that date will likely be moved, with a Randy Couture vs. Boss Rutan heavyweight title match expected to be the main event. The biggest MMA event of the summer was the KRS Pride 3 show on June 24th at Tokyo Budokan Hall. For whatever reason, most accounts say that Pride continued its string of poor shows as it builds to its October 11th show at the Tokyo Dome, headlined by the Rickson Gracie vs. Nobuhiko Takada rematch. Takada, in his first match of any kind since the Gracie match last October, headlined this show in what was generally believed to be a worked match, winning with a heel hook in 2:17 from unknown Kyle Sturgeon, a Joe Moyer, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu student from Southern California. There was no way, with the Gracie match on the horizon, that Takada would be put at risk, even against a no-name opponent, and it was pretty well known in the dressing room the night of the show that Takada's match figured to be the only worked match on the show, and it was apparently discussed in the dressing room ahead of time even that the finish would be a heel hook in the first round. While Takada was a great draw years ago as a pro wrestler, including headlining the biggest run of Tokyo Dome sellouts in history, most of his appeal has been gone due to poor showings, inactivity, and the Gracie loss, along with the folding of his pro wrestling company, UWFI, and generally flaky reputation. This show, with Takada as the top draw, drew a crowd announced as 8,000, but paid attendance was closer to 4,500 in the 16,000-seat arena. The biggest name fight to UFC fans was scheduled to be Gary Goodridge vs. Kimo. However, Kimo tore his ACL in training about a week before the fight. Goodridge fought an unknown Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter trained by Moreira known only as Amir, and won in 7:23 when the referee stopped the match, with Goodridge landing a series of punches on the ground to increase his record to 9-6. In what was, at least after the show, the most talked about and most exciting match, Kazushi Sakuraba, a pro wrestler who captured UFC heavyweight tournament in December, faced Carlos Newton, the Canadian who looked so impressive in the middleweight tournament at the most recent UFC, where he lost an extremely close split decision to Dan Henderson in the finals. In something of a surprise, Sakuraba, now 3-0, dominated much of the match before gaining a tap out to an armbar in 15:19, actually 5:19 of the second 10 minutes round, dropping Newton to 3-3. In the other big name fight, Mark Kerr increased his record to 9-0 without so much as even a dangerous challenge to date, beating noted Brazilian Pedro Otavio, now 15-4. Otavio is best known in Japan for beating Koji Kiao in a shoot, which propelled him into pro wrestling, where he lost a worked match on a major show to Keiji Muto. Kerr won in 2:13 with a hammerlock. Otavio never tapped and the referee stopped the contest, and apparently Otavio heavily protested that decision. The show opened with two poor matches that were heavily booed by the crowd. Shunsuke Matsui, a former pro wrestler with the now defunct Kingdom promotion in his first True Valley Tudo match, although he did wrestle in shoot matches with Kingdom, battled to a 40-minute draw against Akira Shoji, now 2-1-3, who is best known in Japan for going to a 30-minute draw against Henzo Gracie last year at the Tokyo Dome in a match that he would have won had there been judges. Fans booed the heavily slow-paced defensive struggle. The second match pits 6'8.5", 700-pound Emmanuel Yarbrough against unknown Daiki Takase. Takase basically ran away from Yarbrough for the entire first 10 minutes with the fans heavily booing. But it was smart strategy, since Yarbrough had no conditioning and just staying on his feet and holding up his hands for that length of time zapped his strength. Takase continued that strategy in the second round until the referee threatened to disqualify Takase for running away. At this point Takase attacked, taking Yarbrough down and throwing punch after punch to his blown-up foe before Yarbrough either tapped or the ref stopped it at 13:22. New Japan held a press conference on June 30th to announce most of the key matches for its August 8th show at the Osaka Dome, which will be headlined by Tatsumi Fujinami or Hiroyoshi Tenzan, depending upon the result of their July 14th title match, defending the IWGP Heavyweight title against Masahiro Chono, who has actually never held the title during his career and is expected to end up with it at the end of the show. The other matches announced were Genichiro Tenryu vs Shinya Hashimoto, Don Frye vs Kensuke Sasaki. The original plan was for Sasaki to face a K1 fighter, but obviously the K1 vs New Japan angle fell through. A tag team match with the retiring Great Kabuki teaming with Great Muta against opponents that weren't named. The return from WCW of Yuji Nagata, who will team with Kazuyuki Fujita against Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi, and the finals of the tournament to crown the first IWGP Junior Heavyweight Tag Team Champions. WWF King of the Ring history. July 8, 1985, Don Muraco beat Iron Sheik. July 14, 1986, Harley Race beat Pedro Morales. September 4, 1987, Randy Savage beat King Kong Bundy. October 16, 1988, Ted DiBiase beat Randy Savage. October 14, 1989, Tito Santana beat Rick Martel. September 7, 1991, Bret Hart beat IRS. June 13, 1993, Bret Hart beat Bam Bigelow. First time King of the Ring was a pay-per-view event. In previous years King of the Ring was an annual house show attraction with no national publicity, held in the Boston/Providence market. June 16, 1994, Owen Hart beat Razor Ramon. June 25, 1995, Mabel beat Savio Vega. June 23, 1996, Steve Austin beat Jake Roberts. June 9, 1997, Hunter Hearst Helmsley beat Mankind. June 28, 1998, Ken Shamrock beat Rocky Maivia. Mexico EMLL is putting together its biggest show in years on July 19th at the 30,000-seat Palacio de los Deportes in Mexico City. It's basically going to be some form of a tag team tournament with the losers advancing and the loser of the final match having to unmask. Virtually every major masked name will appear along with several no names, which hurts it because who cares if they unmask, including El Hijo del Santo, Universo 2000, El Hijo del Gladiador, Shocker, Mascara Magica, El Hijo del Espectro, Rey Pirata, Rey Bucanero, Shu El Guerrero, Lismark Sr., Super Astro, Tinieblas Jr., Tinieblas Sr., Solar, Atlantis, Violencia Zapatista, Fishman, Mr. Niebla, Villa, Mascara Sagrada, Rayo de Jalisco Jr., Fantasma, Villano 3, Angel Azteca, Felino, Mil Mascaras, Scorpio Jr., Dr. Wagner Jr. and Blue Panther. The word is that Promo Azteca is going to get back going after the World Cup, with Jorge Rojas, Julio Cesar Rivera and Super Muñeco running the show. Khan will have some ownership power, but ultimately will have very little involvement in the promotion, particularly on a day-to-day basis. The June 26th Arena Mexico show was headlined by Rayo vs Steel Val Venis, in a non-stipulation singles match which may have been Steele's final match since he's not booked there this week and starts on the road with WWF at the Canadian house shows. Plus Negro Casas and Felino and La Fiera vs Santo and Panther and Scorpio Jr. and Brazo de Oro and Brazo de Plata and Aguila vs Apollo Dantes and Gran Marcus Jr. and Violencia. The July 3rd Arena Mexico is headlined by Tinieblas Jr. and Casas and Fiera vs Villanos 4 and 5 and Bestia Salvaje and Los Hermanos Dinamita vs Brazo de Oro and Shocker and Mr. Niebla, back from knee surgery, plus Pantera and Aguila and Olympico versus Black Warrior and Rey Bucanero and Zumbito, with the idea of building to an Aguila versus Black Warrior mask match, since Aguila already took his mask off in the US, and it's pretty well known in Mexico about that. CMLL is running the Auditorio in Tijuana on July 3rd with Brazo de Oro and Super Parka and Ultimo Dragon versus Gran Marcus Jr. and Jerry Estrada and Violencia. A hair versus hair match with Sueño Chicano versus Thunderbird. Expect Chicano to get his head shaved. And Tarzan Boy and Salsero and Cinco Dimension versus Damien and Virus, who is former mini Damien Cito, now working as a regular wrestler with a new name and is the current Mexican national lightweight champion. And Halloween. AAA ran June 26th in Tijuana at the Auditorio, drawing about 800 fans, although only a few major stars appeared, with the biggest name being Pero Aguayo Jr., who has really improved over the last year and is one of the very few AAA wrestlers worth a damn. AAA is ECW taken to a different extreme, in that it's all brawling and garbage wrestling, but the wrestling itself for the most part is terrible, with Aguayo Jr. being one of the exceptions. Pero Sr., who is the biggest draw still, probably in the entire country, at 52, has really slowed down from a few years ago, and his dropkick is even lower, but still puts out a lot and is still doing topes with that broken down body. Some notes from the first Triple Mania on June 7th in Chihuahua. The cage match with Kickboxer versus Heavy Metal, with the hair of Tirantes and Pepe Casas at stake, saw Metal about to win when Tirantes got in the cage and they were doing a double team. Casas, the father of Heavy Metal, and also the father of Felino and Negro Casas, who turned 65 a few weeks earlier, made the save. Tirantes and Kickboxer ended up chaining Casas to the cage and were doing a number on him. As Heavy went to make the save for his father, both Kickboxer and Tirantes escaped from the cage first, and Casas had to have his head shaved. The belief is that they'll do a rematch with Heavy putting up his own hair against the mask of Kickboxer. Pero Aguayo Jr. and Sr. won the Mexican national tag titles from Fuerza Guerrera and Mosco de la Merced, not the same Mosco de la Merced who has appeared in WWF, Japan, and for Promo Azteca, on the same show. On June 22nd, Vampiro beat Pimpinela Escarlata in Nuevo Laredo before another packed house of 13,000 at the Bullring. There may be no bigger drawing card in any specific city anywhere in the world right now than Pimpinela in Nuevo Laredo. Sangre Chicana beat the AAA version of Mascara Sagrada on May 16th in Coahuila to win the Mexican national heavyweight title. Here's a name from the past. Carlos Coloso Colasetti worked a show last week in the state of Hidalgo. Colasetti was an early 70s fixture in Southern California. When Kiss lost to Pierre Roth Jr. on June 19 in Tijuana, he revealed his name as Manuel de los Santos, 39. Many newspapers around the U.S. printed a lengthy AP story about the Brennan twins, who did some pro wrestling and drew the biggest crowds of the year to pro wrestling in Mexico for AAA. Pro wrestling was positioned in the lead of the story, although it was only a small part of the story. Jorge and Antonio Brennan are major television stars in Mexico, mainly popular with young girls because they are early 20s guys who wear tight shirts and pants, as hosts of a TV show called Wrong Side of the Law, which was canceled largely because Mexico's President Ernesto Zedillo launched a campaign against TV violence. They are now stars of a new show that is very similar to the first show, called Hard and Direct, or actually Dulo y Directo. AAA has a tag team with the same name as the show as a way for the show to show clips of the tag team regularly, one of whom used to be Mascara Sagrada Jr. The story claimed that by doing pro wrestling, they added younger boys to their fan base from just the teenage girls, although we're told that the two really aren't that popular among the boys. Tokyo Magnum headlines the July 5th show and now call upon challenging Leo del Gladiador for his IWRG championship. All Japan. There are no signs of a business pickup on this tour, which runs July 4th to July 24th. The opening night is in Toda with Gary Albright and Yoshihiro Takayama and Masahito Kakihara versus Toshiaki Kaoda and Akira Taue and Masao Inoue. Monukiya Mossman and Tamon Honda versus Kenta Kobashi and Kentaro Shiga, and Super Delphin and Grand Naniwa versus Satoru Asako and Yoshinobu Kanemaru. So Delphin is working the entire tour this time. July 5th at Korakuen Hall has Kaoda and Taue versus Jun Akiyama and Honda, Kobashi versus Johnny Smith, which actually should be one hell of a match, Johnny Ace and Giant Kimala 2 and Mossman versus Albright and Takayama and Kakihara, Headhunters versus Inoue and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, and Delphin and Naniwa versus Shiga and Kanemaru. July 15th at Osaka Furitsu Gym has Kaoda and Taue versus Albright and Takayama, Kobashi versus Kakihara, Ace and Wolf Hockfield and Smith versus Akiyama and Amori and Mossman, Hunters vs. Gedo and Jado, Dolphin and Naniwa vs. Shiga and Kanemaru, and Yoshinari Ogawa vs. Kikuchi in the junior heavyweight tournament. July 18th at Korakuen Hall has Albright and Takayama and Kakihara vs. Kobashi and Ace and Hiroshi Hase, Akiyama vs. Mossman, Hunters vs. Kawada and Inoue, and Shiga vs. Kanemaru in the juniors tournament. July 19th in Niigata has Kobashi and Mossman vs. Akiyama and Honda, Kawada and Taue vs. Takayama and Kakihara, all Asian tag titles with Smith and Hockfield vs. Headhunters, Albright vs. Kimala 2, and the finals of the junior tournament. Final show on July 24th at Budokan Hall besides Kobashi vs. Akiyama for the Triple Crown has Kawada and Amori vs. Hase and Mossman, which is almost mid-blowing if you think about that being the semi-main event for a Budokan show. Taue and Jun Izumida vs. Albright and Takayama and Ace and Smith and Hockfield vs. Hunters and Kimala 2. Although the main event may well be a classic, on paper this figures to be the worst drawing Budokan show maybe of the decade. June 14th TV show did a 2.2 rating. New Japan. Aside from the announcement of the Osaka Dome show, the biggest angle they continue to run is with Naoya Ogawa. Ogawa was fired by Antonio Inoki's mythical UFO due to his attacking Seiji Sakaguchi on June 5th, but on June 29th he was reinstated with no reason given. I guess they've been studying WCW angles and Ogawa is kind of like the power bomb. However, he is still banned from New Japan, and Sakaguchi said that he was banned from being at all New Japan shows unless he buys a ticket, and that he's not allowed backstage or near the dressing room area. There will be no WCW talent at the Osaka Dome because the big names will be doing the Road Wild pay-per-view on the same day. The relationship with the two companies is still on. New Japan started its tour on June 24th with the biggest news story being that Shinya Hashimoto has not appeared at any of the shows. Actually, Tokyo Sports did its own after-mag type angle saying that Hashimoto and Kazuo Yamazaki are going to leave New Japan for UFO, but from what we understand, Hashimoto is really sick, and if you understand the mentality of the Japanese and what they work with, you know he must be really sick. Genichiro Tenryu returns on July 9th and works the final week of the tour. Kensuke Sasaki has a hip pointer but is still working every night. Scott Norton has shaved his head and is basically being pushed as a total copy of Bill Goldberg, coming out in every match and dominating his foes and winning quickly with power moves. The other angle seems to be setting up Jushin Liger and Koji Kanemoto as a tag team for the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Tournament. Kanemoto had already stated that he wouldn't be teaming with regular partner Shinjiro Otani after a split-up. On June 25th at Korakuen Hall, they had Otani and Kanemoto team with Kendo Kashin, who is usually on the rival team, against Liger at El Samurai and Dr. Wagner Jr. when Otani pinned Samurai. Kanemoto didn't get along with either partner, although Otani and Kanemoto are still working the house shows as a tag team. At the June 28th show in Nagano before a sellout 4,300 at the Winter Olympic Hall, Kanemoto pinned Kashin in a singles match and then said that he couldn't team with Kashin because he's not a good tag partner as his submission and mat work style doesn't lead to good double team moves. He again said he wanted to team with Liger and that he wouldn't team with Kashin, Hani, or Tatsuhito Takaiwa. June 13th TV did a 2.5 rating. Other Japan notes. Rings ran June 27th at Tokyo Bay NK Hall before 4,240 fans in a 7,000-seat building, a figure that has to be a big disappointment since the main event was Kiyoshi Tamura vs. Tsuyoshi Kosaka, the two top Japanese stars of the promotion, and they went to a 30-minute draw. Ever since Tamura got obliterated by Valentin Overeem, his drawing power has taken a major hit and they needed him strong because with Akira Maeda retiring soon, Tamura was the most charismatic and biggest mainstream name left in the promotion. Masayuki Naruse retained his under 209 pounds title, beating Kenichi Yamamoto in 11:07 with an armlock submission. In an undercard match, Wataru Sakata gained revenge, beating Willie Peters in just 1:45 with an ankle lock after the ridiculous match they had in Holland in February, where the ref was so blatantly favoring Peters and overlooking his fouls, and at one point refused to accept Sakata as the winner after Peters tapped out from a facelock, calling it an illegal move that Sakata basically quit. In Holland it was ruled as Peters winning, but all the Japanese press, because of how ridiculous it was, reported the result back home as a no contest. The next show will be July 20th at Yokohama Arena with Akira Maeda in either his last match or next to last match of his career against Yoshihisa Yamamoto, plus Bitsade Terriel defends the Rings World Heavyweight title against Kosaka, which should be a title change. Volkan vs. Kenichi Yamamoto and Tamura vs. Sakata. Originally this card was to feature a Tamura vs. Overeem rematch, but it was cancelled with no explanation given. After that will be August 28th in Niigata with Han vs Teriel and Tamura vs Naruse already announced. Koji Kiao will be holding a press conference on July 1st, and the belief is that he is going to announce his retirement from pro wrestling. Kiao, 34, was the youngest and most would also say the most undeserving grand champion in the history of sumo wrestling, before being kicked out of the sport for throwing the mother of his coach through a window, really, at the age of 24. He ended up, where else but in pro wrestling, with New Japan, after being trained briefly by Luthez, and debuted with much fanfare on the February 10, 1990 Tokyo Dome show where he pinned Bam Bigelow, which set at the time was the all-time record attendance for Japanese pro wrestling and the largest gate of any kind in pro wrestling history, and also did a tremendous TV rating. However, Kiao never developed into anything but a very large, out-of-shape poor pro wrestler, and was fired by New Japan. He wound up with various indie groups and drew some good houses, doing a series of matches against Tenryu. Perhaps the single most famous pro wrestling match he'll be remembered for was a match against Nobuhiko Takada at Budokan Hall. To be given credibility as a shooter, Kiao was given a few wins over some of UWFI's best wrestlers, including Kazuo Yamazaki. The show was an advanced sellout, with Kiao agreeing to a price in the $75,000 range to put Takada over. However, the day before the show, all kinds of problems arose when Kiao wouldn't do the job. To get the match in the ring, they agreed to a draw match, and the match was worked until the moment Takada found an opening and he took his shot and with one kick, knocked the 370-pounder down like a redwood tree. The other thing he'll be remembered for was on a combination WWF and SWS card, where he had a singles match against John Tenta. The match turned into a shoot, where nothing actually happened as neither guy would make the first move, and Kiao grabbed the house mic and started giving a speech about how pro wrestling was fake until the power was turned off and he was fired from that job as well. He tried his hand at Vale Tudo, but lost to Pedro Otavio, and then came to UFC, where he got punched in the nose by Mark Hall on the Detroit show in the undercard of the second Severn Shamrock match, and it was stopped in less than 1 minute. Kiao and Tenryu also beat Demolition once on a WWF pay-per-view show in a horrible match. The Fuji Television Network on June 28 broadcasted a special which apparently was on the history of the WWWA Women's World title, showing all kinds of historical clips going back nearly 30 years. A correction to the previous report on the retirement of the great Kabuki. Kabuki's final match will be September 7th at Korakuen Hall. We mistakenly reported it as being July 9th. IWA ran Korakuen Hall on June 24th, with Kabuki forming a tag team with Yoshiaki Yatsu to beat Shigeo Okamura and Keisuke Yamada in the main event. This was put together for historical purposes, as back around 1982, it was Kabuki who got Yatsu, then called Tola Yatsu, a job working for Fritz von Erich in Dallas, and the two both teamed and feuded there. Hiromichi Fuyuki and Koji Nakagawa and Yukihiro Kanemura won the vacant FMW World Street Fight 6-man titles, beating Hayabusa and Riki Fuji and Hisakatsu Oya on June 28 in Hashoye. Pancrase on July 26 in Aomori will be headlined by Masakatsu Funaki's first match back since dropping the title on April 26. He'll face the winner of the July 7th match between Asami Shibuya and Keiichiro Yamamiya. Also on that show will be Ryushi Yanagisawa vs Yuki Kondo, with the winner probably being in line for a match with Guy Mesger for the title, plus Satoshi Hasegawa vs Jason Godze. Great Sasuke began training this week for his comeback match on July 18. Genichiro Tenryu will be working some dates for War since its top star, Nobutaka Araya, broke his neck and is out of action. From the photos of the Hisashi Shinma angle in the magazines this week, one thing has to be said, and that is for 64 years old, Shinma was in tremendous, at least cosmetic, condition. He didn't at all physically look out of place in the ring. Here and there. They are doing an angle in Memphis where Jerry Lawler has quit the Power Pro promotion. It wasn't clearly explained as to why, but it was pushed hard on the June 27 television show that Lawler was done, and hinted it was due to problems with Randy Hales. They're doing a worked angle with the two as a takeoff on McMahon Austin, and him being disappointed because he didn't cleanly beat Kane at the June 23 Memphis show. They said you would continue to see Lawler as an announcer on other wrestling shows and maybe wrestle occasionally, but not in Memphis. Bill Dundee did an interview saying that he thought Lawler did a great job in the match with Kane and he shouldn't have quit over his performance. Hale said simply that it's a new day and they are apparently going to do a tournament on July 4th when the TV show airs in primetime at 7 p.m. live from a major fireworks festival in Memphis to crown the new king of Memphis wrestling, and they continue to build the angle with manager Brandon Baxter and TV director Creighton Norman about the July 4th holiday, as Baxter said we shouldn't celebrate the holiday, and Norman claimed to be a Vietnam vet who was mad at his anti-patriotic interview. The next house show at the Mid-South Coliseum will be July 21st, with the main event being hinted as Rocky Maivia defending the IC title against Brian Christopher. Todd Gordon returned to wrestling on June 27th in an angle at longtime bitter enemy Dennis Coralluzzo's show in Mount Holly, New Jersey, before about 200 fans, to prove once again that the line between being friends and enemies in pro wrestling is so thin it's often imperceptible. Coralluzzo was in the ring making an announcement about the next show in the city when 4 masked men beat up on him. A 5th masked man then came to the ring and put his foot on the fallen Coralluzzo. The first 4 guys then took off their masks, revealing Stevie Richards, 911, and the Pitbulls. Before Gordon could unmask, the dressing room emptied, although it was Gordon, and they made sure everyone knew because he took off enough of his mask and was wearing his trademark suit. Gordon had disappeared from wrestling, supposedly to spend more time with his family, after allegedly failing in an attempt to bring a group of ECW wrestlers to WCW to do a promotional feud on Nitro. Gordon was the founder and for a long time the owner of ECW, before eventually selling the company to Paul Heyman. While everyone pretty well expected Gordon would return to wrestling at some point because he seemed to have the bug worse than most, it is a surprise it's with Coralluzzo, since the two have been enemies for so long, and that it's with a promotion that was long considered the area promotional rivals of ECW. Now that ECW has expanded to so many new markets and has pay-per-view, it's really unfair to consider Coralluzzo as a serious promotional rival on a major scale, although they still do compete for some of the same buildings and have a history of playing dirty tricks and double crosses with each other. But it wasn't all that long ago where Coralluzzo and Heyman were supposedly going to bury the hatchet in exchange for Jim Cornette working ECW, and that deal fell apart with bitter feelings on both sides. Apparently the Pitbulls, who have been friends with Gordon for a long time, approached Coralluzzo about 3 or 4 weeks ago with the idea for the angle, and that Gordon would be willing as he wanted back in wrestling, and Coralluzzo thought it would be good for business. The plans are that the angle will continue on July 31st in Mount Holly, New Jersey. Gordon told Coralluzzo that he still owned the rights to the initials ECW so that the feud could be promoted as ECW versus NWA. There is already speculation that Gordon played the hand this way as a way to get back into ECW as a heel manager by not only doing what he did last year but also doing business with the rival promotion. Missy Hyatt will be doing the MC work for a July 11th country music concert with Black Hawk at Hornfield in Red Lion, Pennsylvania. All Pro Wrestling will be doing a tournament patterned after All Japan's Champion Carnival. The tournament starts on July 10th in Hayward, and the round-robin matches continue through October 2nd, with the championship match taking place in late October. The contestants will be Michael Modest, Robert Thompson, Vic Grimes, Aaron O'Grady, Donovan Morgan, Tony Jones, Vinny Massara, and Boyce LeGrand, with 3 tournament matches taking place at all the bi-weekly house shows at their gym in Hayward and occasion shows at Swiss Park in Newark, California. Don Lewis' first major NWA Georgia show on June 24th drew just 200 fans to the Cobb County Civic Center, the same building ECW ran its recent pay-per-view, which was reported as a horrible show. The main event was scheduled as Dan Severn versus the Patriot Del Wilkes, but Wilkes no-showed and Severn instead beat Iron Sheik to retain the NWA title. Psycho Sid also no-showed, keeping his perfect record intact, this time reported as being due to breaking his hand. After the show, Lewis quit the NWA. Music City Wrestling will be running a King of Nashville tournament on August 8th in, where else? Mr. Hughes no-showed his scheduled debut with the group on June 23rd. Tommy Rich was scheduled to start back up on June 30th, teaming with Flash Flanagan against Reno Riggins and Stephen Dunn. Penn Athletic Wrestling, in conjunction with the Cauliflower Alley Club, will be doing a Walk of Fame weekend at the Pittsburgh Hilton Hotel from November 13th to November 15th, which will be a convention and a gathering of wrestling legends including Lou Thez, Vern Gagne, Killer Kowalski, Fabulous Moolah, Gene Kiniski, Lou Albano, Pat Patterson, Fred Blassie, Harley Race, and Nick Bockwinkel. NWA All-Star Wrestling, promoted by Greg Price, is running August 5th in Sanford, Florida, with Dory Funk vs. Bobby Duncombe Jr., Rob Van Dam vs. Jerry Lynn, and Sabu vs. Hack Myers. The Newark Star-Ledger ran an article on June 26 about Tito Santana. Santana owns a hair styling salon at the Roxbury, New Jersey Mall and works as a substitute PE teacher and assistant football coach at the local high school. In the article, Santana claimed while there is a lot of entertainment in wrestling, that it is a legitimate sport. The June 26 Knoxville News Sentinel ran an article on area wrestling legend Ron Wright. The story was about his wrestling career and focused on him being named as commissioner of Terry Landell's local Tennessee Mountain Wrestling promotion. Pro wrestling made its way to the city council in Stoneham, Massachusetts. A local pro wrestling talk show aired a tape of the Cactus Jack vs. Terry Funk match from a few years back at Kawasaki Baseball Stadium for the King of the Death matches on the public access station. Due to the blood and the barbed wire and the fact it aired during daytime hours, they requested that local cable affiliate Media One should have reviewed the tape before playing it, and if airing it at all, should only have done so late at night. MMA. Rumina Sato from Japan came into Richmond Hills, Ontario over the weekend for a major submissions tournament. Apparently he came as a guest, but decided to enter in the 167-pound division and wound up tapping people out quickly with flashy moves until losing in the finals by Marcio Fitosa, the 1997 Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion in that weight class, by decision after 5 minutes, largely because Fitosa maintained the top position. However, Sato then entered the overall competition in which the top 2 finishers from each weight class entered. Fitosa, through orders of his coach in Brazil, didn't go into the absolute tournament with the feeling that he had already made his international reputation by beating Sato and winning his weight class, and why risk it by going on and risking facing Sato again. Even though Sato only weighs about 152 pounds, he tapped everyone out quickly to win the overall, again largely with spectacular finishes, including choking out Joel Gerson in 2:36, who is the guy who upset Sato, handing him his only MMA loss in Japan earlier this year. Sato is considered in many circles as pound for pound the best fighter in the world, and certainly if he's not, he is one of the 2 or 3 most exciting. International Vale Tudo Championships promoter Sergio Battarelli is attempting to put together a Vitor Belfort vs. Mike Van Arsdale match for August 16th in Brazil. Apparently Draca has not officially folded after its attempt at a pay-per-view as reported here a few weeks ago. Several checks, including Maurice Smith's, bounced. However, the promoters have been in contact with Smith and are claiming they are still alive and they are going to make good on his money. Tsuyoshi Kosaka is scheduled to move to Seattle full-time in August to train with Maurice Smith and is trying to dedicate himself more toward MMA rules than rings rules. Plans for the KRS October 11th Tokyo Dome show besides Rickson Gracie vs. Nobuhiko Takada are Tom Erickson vs. Igor Vovchanchyn, not definite but that is the idea, along with singles matches involving the likes of Marco Ruiz, Mark Kerr, and Oleg Toktarov. And how is this for miscommunication? In the DirecTV ad for the UFC's taped July 17th pay-per-view show, which will be headlined by the Frank Shamrock vs. Jeremy Horn match from Mobile, Alabama, it reads, "This is the most dangerous and exciting martial arts tournament in the world. No pads. No judges. No rounds. Just an all-out fight to the finish." ECW. Ticket sales for the August 2nd pay-per-view from Dayton look strong as they've surpassed 2,000 tickets in a building currently set up for 4,500 over the first week. Tickets have been on sale, although they can put 6,000 in if sales continue at this pace. The July 3rd show in Queens sold out 8 days ahead of time, although that's only an 800-seat arena. The TV show over the past week opened with no Viagra jokes, no cross-dressing basketball players, and best of all, no Hulk Hogan. The show was taped at the Woodhaven Center in Philadelphia, and the building looked better and the crowd heat was also better than ECW Arena. This could lead and is expected to lead to more shows in that building and perhaps a split between doing Philly shows in both buildings. Paul Heyman doesn't want to leave the ECW Arena because it is the building that built the promotion, and it is the building that people around the world associate the best ECW shows with, and is a building that within wrestling has become world famous as this cult place, even though due to its size, it is far from the highest profit margin of buildings ECW now runs. With ECW gaining in popularity, it is doubtful that doing shows in Philadelphia every 3 weeks can continue much longer because there are so many markets ECW has to pay for its television in, such as Chicago, Detroit and Atlanta, that financially they are going to have to start running on a fairly regular basis to recoup the cost along with the spots they are already running regularly and doing good business in. June 27th at the arena drew about 1,250, which was basically full but not an overflow crowd, for what was described as one of the best shows of the year. The scheduled opener was Tommy Rogers and Chris Chetti vs. Tracy Smothers and Little Guido. However, it was announced that Rogers wasn't cleared to wrestle, so it wound up as a singles match with Chetti losing to Tommy Rich in a very bloody match. Bobby Duncombe Jr. pinned John Cronus. Masato Tanaka pinned Balls Mahoney. Mahoney whacked Tanaka with chair shots, which would knock Tanaka down, but he'd always get up, getting more of a crowd reaction each time. Tanaka then hit Mahoney with 3 brutal chair shots, which Mahoney kicking out of the pin, but Tanaka got the pin using a swinging DDT. It was said that Tanaka got over more than any newcomer to ECW in recent history. Jerry Lynn and Mikey Whipwreck beat Justin Credible and Jason when Lynn pinned Credible. Joey Styles introduced Shane Douglas as the new color commentator and noted that his surgery had gone well. Taz came out and they argued. Bam Bigelow came out as well. It wound up with Taz ordering the TV cameras turned off and challenging Bigelow to a match before the pay-per-view, which ended in a 20-minute draw, which was mainly a brawl outside the ring that got over really well, with Taz getting him in the choke just as time was running out. Axl Rotten no contest Jack victory when half the world did a run-in to build to later matches. Spike Dudley first pinned Ulf Herman in about 10 seconds with his acid drop, and then pinned nearly as large Paul Baiku, that's right's bodyguard, just as fast. Dudley's beat Sandman and Tommy Dreamer and Atsushi Onita. Sandman and Dreamer came out together and introduced Onita after the match had started. Onita got a big pop initially to the song Wild Thing, his trademark in Japan, although some reports claim the pop was an illusion and it just sounded loud because the music was cranked up so loud, although he didn't look good in the ring. Onita accidentally hit Sandman with a barbed wire board, but then DDT'd Dreamer. The Dudleys continued to work them over with Onita slapping Bubba's hand and walking out. New Jack tried to make the save but Victory attacked him. Spike Dudley also came out but it wound up with all the faces being left laying. The main event saw Sabu and Rob Van Dam winning the tag titles from Chris Condito and Lance Storm. The June 26th show in Blackwood, New Jersey drew about 700 with the basic typical show, said to be below average. WCW. The behind-the-scenes tension is really building. We don't have a lot of details, but it does appear that there are big problems involving Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash, as there have been, but perhaps now bigger than ever. Nash was not at the Thunder taping on June 24th in Orlando, having been pulled from the show although nobody really knew why, which explained by Sting and Lex Luger defended the tag titles at that show after just a few weeks earlier having it explained that the tag champ can't simply pick any partner and make it a tag title match. After the fact it was later explained that it's Wolfpack rules so Sting could pick any member to defend the title. Nash was also not at the June 29th Nitro in Tampa. We got two different versions of this. One is that Nash was again asked not to come, but the more reliable version is that Nash called in the day of the show and claimed he had suffered a back injury and couldn't make it. Scott Hall was at the Tampa show and scheduled to do an interview. Why that didn't happen, we also have no idea, although we do know Hall walked out of the building during the show and didn't do an interview, and it may have been something about being asked to do a job either on TV or pay-per-view in the future. There is also office heat on Conan, who also wasn't in Tampa, and there is some question whether the heat on Conan is because of Nash or vice versa or both. The June 29th Tampa Nitro drew a non-sellout of 10,900 paying $199,431. It was a terrible show. Kevin Green did an interview and when talking about the tag match, didn't appear to even know who Kurt Hennig was. That will make the public really care about your angle when you don't even know who it's with. Green is a great worker considering how limited his training and experience is, but he doesn't mean a thing as a marquee player anymore in wrestling. Chris Kanyon pinned Horace Boulder in 407 with the reverse Russian leg sweep. Kanyon must be one hell of a worker because this was a good match. Among the moves he debuted were a fisherman's suplex turned into a swinging neckbreaker and a fireman's carry into a flapjack. Boulder, who facially and lack of hair makes him resemble 70s star Alexis Smirnoff, even threw it in a tope. After the match, Sick Boy and Kidman got thrashed by Kanyon until Riggs blindsided him and Raven came out and cut a promo on him and gave him a DDT. They began their brain-numbing drivel with the black and white crew all holding crowbars waiting for Page and Malone to arrive. Stevie Ray did an interview challenging Chris Benoit and Steve McMichael to a match later in the show. Little Dragon pinned Eddie Guerrero in 423. Dragon is a protege of Ultimo Dragon who has amazing agility but is still green since he's been wrestling less than 1 year, but will probably be another Rey Mysterio Jr. in about 3 years. Eddie had him beat, but Chavo came out riding a hobby horse and made a joke about his voice being hoarse. While Eddie worried about Chavo, Dragon pinned him. Eddie hit Dragon with a hobby horse stick after the match. Chavo has been great of late, but this segment was totally stupid and the angle is reaching the level of overkill. The Giant without the cigarette destroyed Sumo Fuji and Judo Suwa by choke slamming both at the same time in 49 seconds. Kurt Hennig, Rick Rude and Giant came out and challenged Green, who came out with Goldberg right behind him, and the NWO guys all ran away before Goldberg even touched any of them. Hogan and Bischoff did an interview where they said nothing. Sting and Lex Luger beat Davey Boy Smith and Jim Neidhart in 8:05 when Sting pinned Smith after a Scorpion Death Drop. The match was horrible even by the standards you'd expect from these four, as it was obvious all four were out there to see how long they could go without ever touching. Even worse was the announcing, as either nobody ever says anything or it isn't allowed to. I mean, there is history with Smith and Luger and Sting and Smith as a tag team and nobody ever acknowledges anything. Saturn pinned Ron Race with a Death Valley driver in 2:29. Actually worse than you'd think. Riggs jumped Saturn after the match, but Saturn dropped him. Volta then dropped Saturn with a full Nelson drop and Kidman splashed him off the top. Raven cut a promo on him and gave him a DDT. Even though Saturn and Canyon are good workers, this entire flock angle comes across totally minor league. Vampiro Canadiense pinned Brad Armstrong with a Michinoku driver in 2:26, which they called the nail in the coffin. No crowd reaction at all. Vampiro's kicks looked real good, but he needs work on his selling. Anyway, he's improved a ton. Disco Inferno and Alex Wright beat Shimo Nobunaga and Tokyo Mangum in 4:29 when Wright pinned Nobunaga with a neckbreaker. The Japanese looked great, but again, nobody cared. Ultimo Dragon beat Dean Malenko via count out in 4:35. Great wrestling, but the crowd had been killed by this point. Malenko had the cloverleaf on when Jericho got on the mic and asked if this was the city that his dead father is buried in, and Malenko chased Jericho to the back and was counted out. McMichael and Benoit beat Harlem Heat in 4:59 when Booker T was pinned after Bret Hart hit him with a chair. Even this was real bad, as McMichael worked most of the match. Then came the disastrous Eric Bischoff show, with the Tonight Show set and a band that looked like four guys Scott Hall brought back with him from rehab, doing another lame interview with Scott Steiner, whose biceps get freakier by the day. He hinted at a guest on next week's show, like they want to commit suicide again, who I have a feeling will be Marcus Bagwell since they're in Atlanta. In the all-time list of bad ideas in wrestling, this is going to wind up very high on the charts. Even so, after spending $70,000 on the set alone, that means we're probably going to be seeing it again next week. Booker T challenged Hart to a match. Ray got mad at him, telling him he should just jump him. Hart came out and accepted the challenge for the pay-per-view in San Diego. Ray wanted to jump Hart, but Booker told him he wanted to do it in the ring. They gave the impression this was going to be a TV title match. Then they brought out Michael Buffer for the grand main event announcement, and the main event turned out to be Goldberg destroying Glacier in 2:16. Finally, after teasing it the entire night, and this was a tease that didn't work, Page and Malone arrived in their 18-wheeler. They pulled up to the back where the entire black and white crew except Hogan were waiting with crowbars. So as Page and Malone got out, supposedly carrying a truckload of chairs and a big surprise, they each had one chair and no surprise. The black and white guys, despite outnumbering them, having Giant on their side and all being armed, etc., all ran away when Page and Malone arrived. While this was going on, Hogan and Bischoff were in the ring having debris thrown at them. They all wound up in the ring with Page throwing Bischoff out of the ring. Hogan and Malone locked up and Malone delivered a weak body slam and two clotheslines, the first being better than the second, to a huge pop, and Page and Malone delivered an interview where they didn't say much but did get a good reaction. Booker T injured his knee doing a leapfrog in the tag match on June 15th against Sting and Luger and was out of action for 2 weeks. He had an MRI done and was told that he needed to get scoped soon. No word on when he'll get it done since he's booked on the pay-per-view against Hart. Goldberg is the nephew of Fox Sports anchor Larry Burnett. Thunder on June 24th in Orlando drew a sellout 13,874, 11,643, paying $176,986. The show drew a 2.65 rating and 4.9 share on the first run and a 1.5 rating and 5.1 share for the replay. The first run rating was the lowest in the history of the show, and being explained by it airing on a Wednesday instead of Thursday, and why the company the previous Monday barely touches on points like this is unbelievable. This is no exaggeration, but the last few weeks since Dusty started booking, it has once again appeared that whoever is writing this stuff is working very hard at trying to sabotage the company. Only explains part of it, as they've done a few shows before on Wednesday and never fallen below a 3.0, although the replay number was strong. Show opened with Giant issuing a challenge to Sting for a tag title match, but not saying who his partner was going to be. Public Enemy beat Raven and Sick Boy in 4:57. Highlight was Saturn coming out and doing a high plancha on Raven through 2 tables. Hugh Morris pinned Eddie Guerrero due to distraction from Chavo in 5:03. Sting and Conan came out for an interview and Sting got totally lost in the interview, but said he'd team with Luger to defend the title because Nash wasn't there. They made no attempt at a reason for Nash to not be there, but totally killed the tag titles, because if they weren't even important enough for Nash to show up and defend, how prestigious could they really be? And how come Giant couldn't do the same thing that week? He wanted to pick a partner and defend the titles, and they had the match and Dylan overruled everything? They showed a clip of Benoit asking Arn Anderson to come back and form the Four Horsemen. You know what I like about that idea? Everyone, and I mean everyone that I know, whether they are in WWF or WCW, knows that reforming the Horsemen without Flair is total death, yet WCW is going to do it anyway. Boy, that'll show Flair who's boss. Stevie Ray pinned Sumo Fuji with a slapjack, which is basically the Tiger Driver 91 of Misawa fame, in 2:30. Chris Jericho did an interview and J.J. Dillon came out and they announced Dean Malenko would be getting a title shot at the pay-per-view. Dragon and Jericho then had a good match for the Cruiserweight title with an announcing job so bad it was indescribable. At no point was it said this was a title match. Dragon got all sorts of near falls and at no time did the announcers act as if the title was in jeopardy or we could see a title change. Really, they need to drop this Thursday show because everyone in the company is so overworked that they are killing a promotion that just 3 months ago was on fire and is still doing excellent business, but it won't be for much longer the way things are going. Anyway, finally Dragon catches Jericho in the Dragon Sleeper and nobody acts as if the title could change hands. Malenko then attacks Jericho because he once again insulted Dean's dad a few minutes earlier. So Dragon loses via DQ at 9/11. Again, not one mention that Malenko's interference cost Dragon the Cruiserweight title. Nobody would know anything until much later in the show when they did a backstage promo bit with Jericho talking to Dragon saying how it was Malenko that cost him the title, and upon checking, only at that point did I realize the match was a title match and what the story of the match was supposed to be and how badly the announcers dropped the ball. Bischoff and Scott Steiner came out for another interview that went way too long. Bischoff was funny in spots, but the idea of letting Steiner do long interviews is another strange decision. Jim Duggan pinned Barbarian after a knee drop in 3:58. Benoit and McMichael beat Wright and Disco in 13:06 when Benoit used the crossface on Disco. Benoit worked most of the way, which made it a good bout. Main event saw Sting and Luger keep the tag titles, beating Giant and Bryan Adams in 4:22 when Luger racked Adams. Hennig and Rude then attacked Sting and Luger and the entire White and Black did a massacre while the crowd chanted for Goldberg, who never showed up. It appears the NWO hotline will be dropped due to a lack of interest. After their Nitro match on June 22, both Hart and Benoit wanted to work a program together. Supposedly it will happen, with them being promised a pay-per-view match. God help us that they don't put it on Road Wild where all those bikers will throw bottles at them if they start mat wrestling early. Hart has suggested doing both a 2 out of 3 fall match with Benoit and an Iron Man style match with him. No word yet from the FBI, and I don't mean Tracy Smothers, on who left the message before the last pay-per-view match about Hart's father dying. Read the Time magazine story on pro wrestling in the June 29 issue. There really isn't much to comment on. Most of the facts were accurate aside from the $1 billion figure of what wrestling merchandise grosses. They pushed how high the TV numbers were, really didn't differentiate between WCW and WWF when it came to numbers or product, but were aware there was a wrestling war. They gave the impression that Ted Turner created WCW out of the blue because wrestling was a profitable business and not that he bought an existing company from Jim Crockett and that pro wrestling had been a staple on his television networks since the beginning of time, which was the other real inaccuracy, although that seems to be part of WCW's own version of revisionist history. At the end they kind of poo-pooed wrestling as not being very entertaining. They mentioned that there was a drug problem, with painkillers being worse than steroids, but went nowhere with it and didn't mention the numbers that have died from the problem. I was disappointed because it was time, but have seen worse and shouldn't have expected any better either. As if the Road Wild pay-per-view wasn't an annual disaster to begin with, this year's show will feature a 30-minute concert by country music star Travis Tritt. In 1989, WCW tried that on a show in Nashville with a concert by the Oak Ridge Boys during a pay-per-view. Now I'm a big fan of the Oak Ridge Boys and I was there live and didn't even watch the concert and nobody in the building cared, and it was even worse on pay-per-view. But none of these people were around in 1989 and none have any knowledge of wrestling, so you know what they say about those who ignore history being doomed to repeat its failures. While there are reports that Karl Malone will be receiving $1 million for the pay-per-view circulating everywhere, while I don't know the real number, it is significantly lower than that as Rodman, who is getting $750,000. Is being paid more than Malone. Time did report that WCW would be opening theme restaurants later in the year. Those in the pay-per-view business expect Bash at the Beach to do the same 2.2 buy rate that WrestleMania did because of Malone and Rodman. They are setting themselves up for quite a fall if they are budgeting based on those projections. There are even reports from people who think all the money they lost by the Holyfield fight being cancelled at the last minute, and despite rumors to the contrary, the fact it hadn't sold a lot of tickets to Madison Square Garden had absolutely nothing to do with the show being cancelled, will be made up by a windfall at Bash at the Beach. It probably will draw more money than King of the Ring, however. We received almost no news from the Universal tapings. Dale Torborg and Chad Fortune were supposed to debut as the pit crew, although I haven't heard confirmation of that happening. There was said to be a great match with the Armstrong brothers against Malenko and Benoit. Rey Mysterio Jr. returned and was said to have looked great. Hurt Atlantis, Emilio Charles Jr. and Vampiro also all looked good in their respective debuts, and that from a storyline standpoint, nothing eventful took place. The advance for July 6th at the Georgia Dome as of June 29th was 25,769 tickets for $831,315. Tickets are going well, but the announcement of Hogan vs. Goldberg did not lead to a jump start on ticket sales at all, as they had already sold 20,000 before the match was announced. Locally, they are advertising that you can only see this match in Atlanta, rather than saying that it won't be on television, but at press time, even with the ratings defeats, the plan was for it to be a dark match with Goldberg going over clean. Both Rodman and Malone are scheduled to appear on that show. There are still about 2,000 tickets remaining for Bash at the Beach. San Antonio Alamodome Nitro on July 27th did 12,000 tickets and $300,000 on the first day they were put on sale. With months of a push for Shawn Michaels vs. Sid last year, the WWF only did $480,000 for Royal Rumble in the same building, although financially this is an entirely different business than in early 1997. There is a major internal audit going on of the WCW company by Time Warner management. Only time will tell if this turns into a major news story or not. Mark Madden should be back working here by the end of the week. Jericho suffered a shoulder injury at the Universal tapings, which is why he didn't wrestle on Nitro. Merchandise for the week was $195,575 or $8.68 per head, as the schedule this week consisted of the TV shows and the Universal tapings, which will be the final Universal tapings, and few of the big stars appeared. The worldwide and pro shows in syndication are going to turn into magazine-style wrap-up shows after the tapings done this week finish up. WCW Saturday Night on June 27th did a 1.9 rating. WWF Raw was as good as Nitro was bad on June 29th from Cleveland before a sellout of 16,505, paying $266,124. The show opened with some local tryout matches as Rhino Richards beat Briar Wellington and Taka Michinoku beat Jimmy V. In shotgun matches, X-Pac beat Jesus Castillo, Farouk beat Lou Marconi, Terry Funk and Dustin Runnels beat New Age Outlaws via DQ, and Men's Teo and Dick Togo beat Papi Chulo and Sean Casey. Raw started with a hot confrontation with McMahon, Gerald Briscoe and Sergeant Slaughter replacing Pat Patterson for one night in the Three Musketeers, as the previous night Patterson's longtime friend Lou Dondero, who was very well known within pro wrestling and had worked for Titan Sports in the office in the past and had been around pro wrestling dating back to the Roy Shire days in San Francisco in the 70s, passed away at the age of 59 from a heart attack, coming out to present Kane with the WWF title belt. Steve Austin came out and challenged Kane to a rematch, claiming that Kane was given the title by his big brother and that he had never beaten him. McMahon said Austin could have a rematch if Paul Bearer agreed. Bearer passed the buck, saying he could have a rematch if Kane agreed, and then Kane agreed, pissing off both McMahon and Uncle Paul. In a real surprise, Steven Regal came out to no fanfare to beat Darren Drostoff with the Regal stretch in 4:41. Jim Ross was trying to get Regal over, but it was amazing that he was brought in basically to be a backdrop for Sable playing remote control robot in the background saying, "I'm sorry, but I can't answer that question." It was almost as if someone wanted to make sure Regal didn't have a chance to get over in his debut, and luckily for them, they got their wish. Ken Shamrock did an interview about winning, which led to both Owen Hart and Hunter Hearst Helmsley coming out, and it wound up with a triangle match, which Triple H actually called a three-way dance, which is the ECW-originated term for triangle match that is on its way to becoming the generic industry term. In the first shoot, Steve Blackman beat Mark Merrow. Val Venis beat Dick Togo in 3:03. Although the crowd had no interest, the wrestling was real good here. Match was mainly a backdrop for the angle where Venis tried to do a low-rent version of the Rick Rude Jake Roberts angle, where he started coming on to a Japanese model said to be Yamaguchi-san's wife. Actually, Yamaguchi-san's real wife is a sometimes pro wrestler that nobody should ever mess with. Anyway, Yamaguchi went after him and slapped him, but Venis threw him down and then clocked all the members of Kaientai when they tried to help him with hard chair shots. There were no Val Venis and Dick jokes because Runnels kept asking everyone if they'd accepted the Lord Jesus Christ into their lives. I'm assuming they are taking a new tact in turning him heel because boy is that character obnoxious. Edge was in the balcony doing his Sting imitation the entire show. In the three-way Dance King of Kings match, Shamrock ended up winning in 12:49 when Maivia hit Triple H with the IC title belt and Shamrock pinned him. They still did those stupid first pinfall rules. As triangle matches go, since they are usually horrible, this was pretty good. Undertaker did an interview explaining that the reason he did what he did was because he didn't want to see his brother set himself on fire, so he had to save his life even though he and his brother may wind up destroying each other. Vince McMahon then came out and said he did it because Undertaker knew he could beat Kane and become the champion, but he also knew that he couldn't beat Austin. McMahon then ordered Undertaker to not interfere in the main event, which of course, guaranteed that Undertaker said he would. Bradshaw beat Canterbury in the other shoot. They explained that Canterbury LOD came out and announced they had brought back Paul Ellering to be their manager. Ellering, with a bald head, came out, and then Skull and 8-Ball came out and jumped LOD and Ellering joined in helping them, so he's going to manage them. They said Sunny wasn't there because she was under the weather. Actually, on June 26th, due to her no-shows at autograph sessions and erratic behavior over the last month or two, Sunny was given an ultimatum by the company to either attend a counseling program or rehab, I'm not sure which, or get terminated, and she accepted the counseling program and won't be back until completing whatever it is they mandated her for. Apparently Sunny is also having, among other things, a difficult time dealing with Sable having shot past her, and her being stuck with LOD, which turned into personal quicksand for her career. Finally, Austin beat Kane to win the title in 8:26. It was another good brawl. Austin got out of the tombstone and hit the stunner for the finish. After the match, Austin also gave Undertaker a stunner. As you can imagine, the place went totally nuts. Both brothers sat up simultaneously after Austin had left the ring. After the show went off the air, Undertaker beat up Kane and left him laying. Don Frye of New Japan has challenged Shamrock for a UFC fight in a UFC interview. Basil DeVito left the promotion to take a job as director of marketing for a thoroughbred racing company. DeVito has always had connections with the horse racing industry but will still have some ties as a consultant to Titan. Undertaker's ankle injury turned out to be bone chips more than a break. At some time he's going to have to take time off for surgery, but it won't be right away. The July 6th Raw was taped on June 30th in State College, Pennsylvania. The show opened with tryout matches with Reckless Youth pinning Steve Corino. This was said to have gotten no crowd reaction and been a bad match. Steven Regal beat Tiger Ali Singh. Paulo Silva pinned Derek Domino with what was said to have been the worst choke slam on record. For Shotgun, it was Drostoff over Bob Holly, Blackman over Lance Diamond, Farouk and Too Cold Scorpio over Too Much in a Good Bout, and Severn over a guy called G.I. Will. Raw opened with McMahon announcing that the main event for the July 26th pay-per-view in Fresno, California would be Undertaker and Austin vs. Mankind and Kane. Austin was furious about having to join Undertaker as a tag team. Shamrock beat Jarrett via DQ and King Mabel showed up and attacked Shamrock and left him laying with a big splash. Vader NC Bradshaw when Kane and Mankind showed up, and Kane tombstone Vader while Mankind put the claw on Bradshaw. DOA beat Headbangers in what was said to have been a boring match. Terry Funk celebrated his 54th birthday doing an Osai moonsault on D'Lo Brown before the match was a no contest when Undertaker came out and choke slammed both guys. Edge beat Jesus Castillo in what no doubt will be billed as a revenge match for Edge injuring Estrada. Jackie challenged Sable to a bikini contest on the pay-per-view. Venice beat Runnels via DQ when Kayontai attacked Venice. After the match, Mrs. Fake Yamaguchi-san slapped Venice, which, this being pro wrestling, means they'll end up having an affair. Whoops, he has to pile-driver her first. And in the latest idea that will be revered everywhere for its originality, DX did what was said to have been a hilarious skit where they dressed up as the Nation and made fun of all of them. If you think it was similar to NWO with the Horsemen when you see it, you're hallucinating because WWF would never copy WCW. At least they got it right because the Nation came out and attacked DX and they had to pull apart, rather than having them all sit there backstage like morons like the Horsemen had to. Shamrock destroyed Mabel, refusing to break the ankle lock after the bell. McMahon then announced a three-way with Undertaker, Kane and Mankind to determine the number one contender who faces Austin probably at SummerSlam. Undertaker no-showed, which saw McMahon call him all kinds of expletives. Mankind refused to wrestle Kane. McMahon ordered it to be Falls Count Anywhere match and ordered Kane to attack Mankind. Kane destroyed Mankind with a brutal chair shot and pinned him, and then took his mask off revealing Undertaker, They didn't have a match to protect both men due to all their injuries, so he gets the title shot, and the latest mystery is why Kane didn't show up and how Undertaker got Kane's costume. It's rather clear they'll be teaming up before too long anyway. This may not be on TV, but the live show then ended with Austin coming out and giving stunners to the new Three Musketeers, Vince, Briscoe and Slaughter. There will be an England-only pay-per-view on December 6th from London. The US pay-per-view for December will be on December 13th from Vancouver, BC. Jose Estrada Jr. was kept off this TV taping recovering from the neck injury from the deal with Edge. Miguel Perez is also out with disc problems in his back. Phil LaFon was officially released. Doug Furnas is technically still under contract, but they are working on terms for his release, as well as he won't be brought back. Robert Kraft of the Kraft family that owns the New England Patriots is scheduled as the referee for the McMahon-Austin arm wrestling match to kick off ticket sales for the August 8th show at Foxborough Stadium, billed as Footbrawl since it's being co-promoted by the Patriots. Members of the team are expected to serve functions such as special referee, manager, and maybe lumberjacks. Among the matches will be a three-way with Undertaker, Austin and Kane for the title, a cage match with X-Pac and Triple H versus Hart and Maivia, and Sable versus Jackie in an arm wrestling match. Patterson will be brought into the San Francisco Cow Palace on July 25th to referee the main event, which will either be the same triangle match for the title or Undertaker and Austin versus Mankind and Kane. As it's booked right now, it'll be the tag match, plus a Unification European versus IC title match with Triple H versus Maivia, Shamrock versus Hart submission match, Outlaws defending against Brown and Kama, Vader versus Mark Henry, Runnels versus X-Pac, Taka and Papichulo versus Too Much, Drostov versus Savio Vega, and LOD versus Midnight Express. It'll be very interesting to see what, if any, reaction Patterson gets, as he headlined the Cow Palace consistently from 1965 to 1976, and during the latter half of that run was the top babyface in the area. When his name has been announced or he's been introduced on WWF shows, he usually gets the best reaction on the show, except for one or two top faces at the time like a Hogan. But it's been more than 20 years since he wrestled regularly in the area, and he's on television as a heel member of the flock, Musketeers. Jose Rivera, a native from Puerto Rico, not to be confused with Jose Luis Rivera or the Los Angeles or Puerto Rican wrestlers that also use the name Jose Rivera, who wrestled as a WWF jobber in the 70s under the name Steve King, passed away on June 29th at his home in Little Ferry, New Jersey at the age of 46. Rivera had been suffering from leukemia since late last year. There was mention in the St. Paul Pioneer Press about McMahon's interest in putting together a group of investors to buy the Minnesota Vikings. Jesse Ventura was on local radio claiming the entire story was made up, but Ventura has no clue of what goes on in wrestling anymore. All bids have to be formally submitted by July 1st, with the minimum bid being $200 million. It has to be an investment group because a figure like this is well out of McMahon's league, as during his trial it came out that the most profitable year in the history of the World Wrestling Federation was in the $5 million to $6 million range, although the prime member of any investment group buying the team has to have $60 million to put as a down payment. Friends of Shawn Michaels are now saying that Michaels' health is better than is being let on, and he'll be back sooner than all predictions. There was an internet interview with Severn where he made some comments regarding Shamrock which are similar to things he's talked about in the past, so don't take this as a work to hype an angle, although perhaps someday it will be used as such. When asked if there was more than a professional rivalry between the two and if there is a personal problem, Severn said that he doesn't like anyone who isn't natural, and went on to say that let's just say he didn't get his body just by working out. But then again, most of the bigger guys in wrestling didn't. When brought up about Shamrock admitting doing things in the past, Severn came back with, "I don't know if it's so much in the past." Severn has always been outspoken on the subject of steroids, particularly in the UFC, and there has always been the underlying heat with Shamrock, who claims to have never done steroids while in the UFC, and has felt that Severn has used steroids as an excuse for the 1995 match he lost, although I can also say Severn fervently believes what he believes. What I do know about Shamrock, since the guy who trained him for Ultimate 1996 is a good friend of mine, is that he was clean when it comes to steroids, not only at that show but leading up to that show, and he was bigger, 227 pounds, and looked more powerful on that day than for any other UFC show he did. Speaking of Shamrock, there is a possibility of him doing either one or two shoots in the next year, as UFC still has the outstanding contract with him for the Takada match that never took place, which, if used, would likely be on a show in Japan tentatively scheduled for November, provided Titan allows him the time off to train for the show. In addition, there is an outstanding lawsuit against him from Pancrase over his previous contract, and there is the possibility of a settlement being offered where both sides would drop their legal problems with each other in exchange for Shamrock doing one last major match for them. Livewire on June 27 did a 1.5 rating and Superstars on June 28 did a 1.9. Since Boston was postponed, the only house show of the week was the Cleveland Raw, which did $156,847 in merchandise, which is $9.50 per head. Andrew Martin, who is on a WWF developmental deal, missed the June 27th show for Pennsylvania Championship Wrestling because he was detained at the border for some problems that were still on his record. WWF is interested in bringing Glenn Osborne into one of its camps. The state of New York put a cap on the amount of total tax that can be taken in for any boxing or wrestling event at $100,000, a $50,000 ceiling from Livegate and a $50,000 ceiling on taxing from TV revenue. Governor George Pataki rushed the bill through before the Holyfield fight that ended up being canceled. While it applies to wrestling, it really isn't applicable to wrestling except if a Livegate exceeds $900,000, which a WrestleMania at MSG would beat. The Harrisburg Patriot News had an article on June 22 on Steve Blackman. It listed him as graduating from high school in Annville, Pennsylvania in 1981, which would make his age at 34 or 35, which naturally means he's being billed as one of the new generation superstars in the WWF. He never wrestled after junior high school, which I guess tells you just how good a wrestler Mark Marrow must be. He played football, basketball and baseball in high school and played 1 year of baseball in JC. He was trained by Tony Altomare and David Schultz and wound up wrestling in Canada in 1988 for Stampede. His career stalled in 1989 when he contracted an illness while on tour in South Africa, which he didn't fully recover from for 3 years. He claims he can bench press 330 for 20 reps and to 10 reps with 100 pounds for dumbbell curls, which if true, and God knows you should never believe weights wrestlers tell you they are lifting, are very impressive figures. He's also teaching both wrestling and martial arts in an area dojo. The Reader's Pages. WWF Latino. The WWF Latino project is going to be very difficult. The WWF has no clue how to use the luchadores. If the WWF uses its own people to run it, it's already doomed for the same reasons WCW would fail at the same project. They need to use people who have knowledge of how to use Mexicans, book Mexican angles, and run a lucha libre territory. The only person qualified to do that in the WWF may be Victor Quiñones. The WWF already blew it in the way they've used Aguila. He's even less over as Papi Chulo than he was as Aguila. What are the Spanish fans going to feel about him selling out? The minis aren't enough to base a whole project around as they have no major drawing power. WCW could have pulled this project off better than WWF if they pooled their resources. I'm very sure Conan could have helped in creating a television show that maximized the strengths of the wrestlers they already have. Ultimo Dragon could have also helped WCW pull it off. He has a group of wrestlers who tape television pretty frequently. The television show airs in Japan on the Jairo Lucha Libre block. Once again, all you would need to do is add a new commentary track and kick him some bucks for production. Unfortunately, WWF and WCW will never figure out a way to book a Mexican wrestler who accidentally gets over. That point is proven with Juventud Guerrera. If the federations have no idea how to get these guys over with an audience that they do know, how will they have any idea on how to use them properly for an audience they have no clue about? Eric Bimbin. Brooklyn, New York. Learning Channel. I spoke to a couple of people who attended a rough cut of the Learning Channel special on pro wrestling. They felt it was better than the On show because it didn't try and cover the history of wrestling. Instead, it pulls back the curtain and tries to take the audience backstage. It doesn't expose anything you wouldn't know. What's left to expose anyway? It will be interesting for casual fans and not insulting to those in the business. Vince McMahon, Eric Bischoff, and a lot of the WWF and WCW wrestlers are featured along with Southern California guys like Johnny Legend, Danny Wolf, Kurt Brown, Superboy, and myself. The show also featured clips of an Al Snow, Sabu, and Terry Funk melee that myself and Larry Doyle promoted in 1994. The show could change from this since it was just a rough cut. There is no date for broadcast. It could air any time from this fall to next spring. The Jid piece was one of the best things you've ever written. Dan Farron. Los Angeles, California. Observer? I think you need to leave out your personal comments when reporting wrestling news. Like myself, I believe people get the Observer for the information, not your personal opinions. Comments about Tony Schiavone's weight were way out of line. James Mitchell. Beckley, West Virginia. I don't know if you get Shotgun Saturday Night in your market, but it's becoming a Meltzer fest. A few weeks ago, Jim Ross and Jim Cornette made a dated reference to the TV show Bonanza, and Cornette said, "Footnote that Dave This week, Ross said that the King of the Ring pay-per-view won't be a thumbs down, and Cornette responded, "Well, the margin of error on those things is plus or minus 100%. Brian Smith, New Haven, Connecticut. Flair. As a longtime supporter of Ric Flair, I can't agree with WCW's position. Bill Goldberg was allowed to miss the Nassau Coliseum show with almost no notice. Ric Flair doesn't appear for a show with the company knowing about it ahead of time and they sue him. Flair's presence makes the television show. He shouldn't go to WWF as he'll just get lost in the shuffle. After 3 or 4 months of a minor push, they'll just have him doing jobs for Austin and Kane. Bischoff and Harvey Schiller should just eat their crow and bring him back. No Horseman group without Flair will ever get over. Matt Cale. Melrose, Massachusetts. WCW TV. Something about the state of WCW. I was at a friend's house and he was flipping through the stations. My friend is a very casual wrestling fan. He'll stop and watch it if it's on. A commercial came on for Nitro and my friend remarked something to the effect of, "I never know who to root for when Nitro is on because every time I turn it on, everyone has switched sides." Jim Caldwell. Ballston Lake, New York. Questions. One of the reasons many wrestlers have gone to WCW is the lighter working schedule. Granted that WCW is near the WWF in average attendance per show, but how many more dates did WWF work than WCW in 1997? Is the road schedule that much lighter than WWF now? Mark Underwood. Yuba City, California. Response from Dave Meltzer. I'd estimate as far as domestic dates are concerned, and these numbers should be close, that WWF did about 190 shows last year and WCW did about 125. In 1998, WCW will do more dates than WWF, but WCW has far more wrestlers under contract so that the WWF individual wrestlers will still be working far more dates. Does WCW have to continue to bury the Mexicans against less talented bums? It seems like every week, La Parka, Psicosis, Silver King and Lismark Jr. get buried deeper and deeper. You would think maybe they could dedicate some time on the weekend shows to get the Mexicans over, but instead we get treated to the likes of Kendall Windham, John Knorr, and Barry Darsow. Why did Vince McMahon spend $2.5 million on Mark Henry and spend money on no-talent bums like Kurgan, Kama Mustafa, DOA and LOD, but can't find the money to promote a competent junior heavyweight division including some top Mexicans and Michinoku Pro guys? Why does WWF push Kurgan as a monster when they already have the ultimate monster heel Invader under contract? Why has Flash Funk been buried? When did Ken Shamrock go from being the world's most dangerous man to the world's most dangerous referee beater? Why is One Man Gang being brought back but Jerry Lynn does well in his tryout match and never gets brought in? With Terry Funk out of the context of garbage wrestling, his age and limitations are being exposed on national television. I don't believe he's ever looked older or more ridiculous. I'm a Terry Funk fan. He's been an all-time superstar for 3 decades, but if he doesn't retire soon, we may witness a crippling injury. Nobody who calls themselves a real wrestling fan could possibly want to see that. For his own sake, I hope he retires soon so that our last memory of him won't be being carried out of the ring injured. If the hardcore fans truly are fans of his, they'll let him retire with dignity. A note to all wrestling fans. If you don't have a Nintendo 64, I seriously recommend going out and buying one and getting the WCW vs NWO World Tour game. This is wrestling at its finest and is tons more fun and entertaining than anything on pay-per-view lately. Skip a couple of PPVs and get the system. What happened in Japan between Big Van Vader and Stan Hansen? Was it a shoot or a stiff work? Is there any chance Baba would allow Kenta Kobashi to make a US tour for the WWF? A good run for him as WWF champion could give both organizations a ton of prestige. Luis Sanchez. Response from Dave Meltzer. There are a lot of reasons why the Mexicans have this plight in WCW. First, they go in with several strikes against them. They are smaller than the Americans, so it's harder for them to get over. They don't complain, at least in English, about doing jobs because in their wrestling everyone does jobs all the time, so since they never complain they end up doing them all the time. They don't speak English well, hence aren't given interview time, which is really how new wrestlers get over today, unless the announcers go out of their way big time to get them over, and in the case of the Mexicans, that also isn't the case. They work a different style, so it takes not only the fans, but also the bookers time to understand what they are doing, and in varying degrees it takes them time to incorporate what they do well into Americanizing their style. Because it's a different style, it makes some of the veteran wrestlers who don't want to learn anything new that work on top not want to work with them, so in that way there is also pressure to keep them in prelim roles only working with younger talent. In addition, there are a lot of politics in WCW and they don't have strong enough allies. Also, with the exception of Conan and Rey Mysterio Jr., by and large they are lower paid than the other wrestlers, and in WCW, a lot of how you are pushed is determined by the financial investment the company has made to you, which has to be justified. A wrestler like Curt Hennig making $750,000 has to be pushed to justify their deal. A wrestler with no name, even if they are a tons better worker and even if they have more charisma, signed to a $85,000 deal like La Parka, isn't going to get that kind of a break. McMahon paid Henry that kind of money because when he signed him he thought he was going to be a national Olympic hero, and the WWF and every promotion has been looking for a charismatic black babyface since the days of JID. At the time it didn't seem like a bad move to them, although the idea of signing someone to a 10-year deal before they've even started training to be a wrestler is risky to the point of almost being mind-boggling. Flash Funk was buried for several reasons. The main one is there was an incident over the weekend of the last WrestleMania which involved police coming to the hotel and embarrassed the company. In addition, while he's shown some spectacular flashes, his work is highly overrated in some circles, particularly over the past year where his ring performance with only a few exceptions has really been around the same level as his push. This isn't a psychosis who still does amazing things in the ring while being buried. One Man Gang got a tryout, but I don't anticipate him getting the job. I guess since he was once someone and dropped so much weight, he was given a chance to prove he could cut it today. Jerry Lynn did really well in his TV match against Taka, but WWF wasn't going to push him and ECW wanted him, and that's how that ended up. Vader and Hansen in Japan was a very stiff work.